Chapter 1145. In the past few decades, the Qi kingdom and the Jing kingdom had been in constant conflict. It was not an exaggeration to say that they were mortal enemies. To be exact, the Jing kingdom had always been suppressed by the Qi kingdom. This situation had been reversed in recent years. After dozens of wars, big and small, the Qi kingdom had been taught a lesson by the Jing kingdom. The hatred between the two countries was rooted in the hearts of every citizen. Now, the Jing kingdom was faced with an opportunity. Li Yi only needed to think about it, and he could completely determine the future of the Qi kingdom and the Jing kingdom. He could even make the Qi kingdom disappear from the history books. However, he did not make this choice in the end. Lin Yong and Xiao Er were packing their belongings. They were about to leave and return to Rui City. Li Yi sat in the courtyard. A figure came up behind him and wrapped her arms around his neck. She whispered in his ear, "Thank you." Li Yi held her hands from the front and said, "What are you thanking me for? Zhao Yi has helped the Lin family for so long. Consider this a favor to him." "Brotherly, this favor is too great. It's so great that Zhao Yi can't bear it." A voice came from outside. "Miss Lin." Zhao Yi walked in and bowed to Lin Wanru first. His salute was extremely respectful and proper. There was nothing to nitpick about. However, it was precisely because of this that his action was even more rude. He was the third prince of the Qi kingdom. Now, he was the emperor of the Qi kingdom. It was impolite for the emperor to bow to his subjects and people. The expressions of the people beside him changed when they saw this. Only the god of fortune Qian and a white-browed monk remained calm. They knew what the third prince was bowing to, and they also knew that the lady in front of him was worthy of it. Because if it wasn't for her, the third prince wouldn't even have the chance to stand here and bow. "Greetings, third prince." Lin Wanru bowed slightly to Zhao Yi, then looked at Li Yi, turned around and walked back to her room. Li Yi gestured for him to sit down and said, "Thank you for taking care of Wanru all these years." Zhao Yi couldn't help but smile and said, "I only told him a few words and did a few things in passing. Brother Li's gift is a bit too much. I'm afraid Zhao Yi won't be able to repay this favor for the rest of my life." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "I'm just doing it out of convenience. You help me take care of Wanru, and I'll give you Zhao Zheng. We're even. Don't talk about owing me or repaying me." Behind Zhao Yi, someone's face twitched. Breaking the siege of the Crown Prince's 150,000 soldiers, solving the third prince's biggest crisis, and giving the capital to him, was this also called doing it out of convenience? Just what sort of person could make the third prince cast aside the chaos in the capital and rush over to meet with him? Zhao Yi looked at him and asked, "Brother Li, you're leaving?" Li Yi nodded and said, "I'm leaving today." Zhao Yi sighed and said with a tone full of regret, "It's a pity that Brother Li's ambition isn't here. Otherwise, you and I can join hands and accomplish a great undertaking." Zhao Yi's words were a bit strange. He was the third prince of the Qi kingdom and would soon be the emperor of the Qi kingdom. What great undertaking did he need the two of them to accomplish? Li Yi looked at him and asked, "What great undertaking?" Zhao Yi thought for a moment and looked at him, saying, "The Lord of the World." The Lord of the World was exactly what it meant. Zhao Yi didn't want to be the emperor of the Qi kingdom, or rather, he didn't just want to be the emperor of the Qi kingdom. He also wanted to be the emperor of the Jing kingdom, the Wu kingdom, and the Zhao kingdom. He wanted to be the master of the entire world. Li Yi looked at him and suddenly asked, "Did I do something stupid?" Zhao Yi nodded and said, "You can say that." Li Yi thought for a moment and took out his autumn water and placed it on Zhao Yi's neck, asking, "Is it too late for me to regret it now?" "How dare you! Stop! Let go of His Highness." The faces of the few people standing behind Zhao Yi changed at the same time as they spoke in a stern voice. Zhao Yi's expression didn't change. He looked at Li Yi and smiled, saying, "The Lord of the World is so difficult that I don't even have half a chance of succeeding. But I know that Brother Li does." His expression didn't change and his eyes were indifferent. He said, "I just hope that one day I can see the Lord of the World. It doesn't matter who becomes the emperor. If Brother Li succeeds, you must remember to come to Zhao Yi's grave and tell me, so that we didn't get to know each other in vain. An official behind him said anxiously, Your Highness. Li Yi looked at Zhao Yi. There was no fear on his face. When he talked about death, it was like he was talking about something normal. Li Yi shook his head and put away his autumn water. He said, Forget it. She just cleaned this sword. If I dirty it, she'll beat me up. It's not worth it. There were always some strange people in this world. Some people like to court death and would feel uncomfortable if they didn't court death for a day. Some people like to help princesses become empresses. And some people like to collect grandmasters. They wanted to collect all the grandmasters in the world. Lulakan, older sister complex, princess complex, queen complex, empress complex, grandmaster complex. Even these people with special hobbies existed. In comparison, Zhao Yi's dream of being the ruler of the world was nothing. Li Yi thought about it and looked at him. He suggested, Why don't you go fight the Jing kingdom first? The Jing kingdom is close and convenient. I can't beat them, Zhao Yi said honestly. Li Yi shook his head and said with disappointment, You still want to be the lord of the world. You retreat at such a small setback. If you're a man, you have to face difficulties, Zhao Yi said helplessly. I really can't beat them. Li Yi thought about it and said, Then consider the Wu kingdom. The Wu kingdom is in chaos. It's easy to fight them. Zhao Yi looked at him and asked, The Wu kingdom's divine punishment and the red barbarian canon have nothing to do with Brother Li? Li Yi shook his head. No. Zhao Yi's attitude was very firm. I won't fight them. The little bit of admiration that Li Yi had for Zhao Yi just now immediately disappeared. He had thought that Li Yi was really a hero with great talent and bold vision. It turned out that he was just a big liar who only knew how to talk. How could he allow others to sleep beside him? Which ruler of the world could tolerate two countries that were stronger than them by his side? Just a moment ago, he was saying that he was the lord of the world, and the next moment, he became a complete coward. Li Yi really admired this kind of shamelessness. For you, don't want to be the lord of the world. A toast to you. Li Yi poured 2 cups of wine, raised 1 cup, and gestured to him. Zhao Yi also raised his cup. This cup is a farewell for Brother Li. The two raised their heads together and drank the wine in their cups. Let's go. Li Yi lifted the curtain of the carriage and casually waved at Zhao Yi. Zhao Yi stood at the gate of the city and watched the carriages go away. Until the carriages completely disappeared in the distance, he sighed, and a deep disappointment appeared on his face. Money God of Fortune pondered for a moment and said, He and Your Highness are not on the same side after all. Zhao Yi nodded. When he raised his head, the disappointment on his face had disappeared. He said, I only hope that the next time we meet, we don't have to fight with swords. A person beside him couldn't help but look at Zhao Yi and ask, Your Highness, since this person is so useful to us, why don't we keep him? Keep him? A middle-aged man who had been standing behind Zhao Yi said, Why should he keep him? Because of those 100 elites? If he has evil intentions towards Your Highness, even if we increase the defense by 10 times, it will be useless. He looked into the distance, and the fear on his face hadn't disappeared. He murmured, Are all the grandmasters in the world from their family, Your Highness? The provincial governor of Xingzhou trembled as he walked to the third prince. He couldn't speak properly. Zhao Yi glanced at him and thought of the last thing that Li Yi had asked of him before he left. He pointed at a new grave not far away and said, Have people repair the area within a radius of 100 zhang of that grave. Don't destroy a single blade of grass or tree within 3 zhang. After doing this, come to the capital to receive your punishment. The provincial governor of Xingzhou knelt on the ground and said loudly, Thank you, Your Highness, thank you, Your Highness. Chapter 1146. Li Yi didn't know what kind of path Zhao Yi would take in the future, but for now, he could be called a great ruler. However, since ancient times, there were so many people who wanted to rule the world, but how many of them did it in the end? The Jing kingdom couldn't win, and the Wu kingdom didn't dare to fight. He unified the world with words. He could continue to dream of unification, but Li Yi just wanted to hold Rui and Wanru in his arms. Unfortunately, they wouldn't let him hold either of them. Along the way, Rui avoided him. She and Wanru were in the same carriage, so he couldn't see either of them. What kind of person was she? After confessing, she acted as if nothing had happened and didn't need to take responsibility. Bored, Li Yi took out 3 tokens and played with them in his hand. The token looked like jade, and he didn't know what material it was made of. There was an azure dragon, a white tiger, and a blurry portrait of a woman, which represented the empress. The real leaders of the holy religion were the 2 goddesses and the 2 protectors. Ruoqing didn't need any token to prove her identity, because her face was the proof of her identity. Therefore, the saint only had 3 tokens. Gathering all 3 of them together, even though they couldn't summon the dragon god, they had full control over the saint. This was Li Yi's goal a long time ago. However, now that he had achieved it, he didn't seem to be as happy as he imagined. Li Yi kept the 3 tokens and would give them to Ruoqing when he returned. Li Yi also asked Su Zheng to remove all the spies planted by the holy religion in the Qi kingdom, including the generals who actually held power in Jiangyi, back to Rui City. These tricks were useless in front of Zhao Yi. Since Li Yi had withdrawn the soldiers besieging the capital and stabilized his position on the throne, he disdained playing around with these things. As for his lofty dream of unifying the world, let's wait and see for now. This trip will pass by Fengzhou, so Wanru has some time to make arrangements for the Lin family. The Lin family's jewelry business and other businesses had been separated by her a long time ago. She had handed over the Lin family's assets to the Lin family to manage. As for the cloth, clothes, liquor, and perfume, they were the dowry she had prepared for herself. A person's energy was limited. No matter how much money he had, it was useless. After discussing with her, Li Yi decided to gradually withdraw from the market of the Qi kingdom. If the merchants of the Qi kingdom wanted to buy these goods, Rui City was a good place to do so. When she entered the house, Ruoqing did not have to be so busy. They walked and played along the way. Zhao Yi had already cleaned up all the provinces and mansions of the Qi kingdom. After the turmoil this time, the Qi kingdom's vitality was greatly damaged. It would probably take a long time to recuperate. Zhao Yi had just ascended the throne, so it would also take a long time to stabilize the situation in the court. They stayed in Fengzhou for about 5 days. After thoroughly making arrangements for the Lin family, they set off again. Rui City. Rui, Ruoqing, and Zumo had already returned. They were not surprised that Wanru came back with them this time. Li Duan walked around the room. With his hands clasped behind his back, he walked up to Wanru. He opened his mouth and immediately closed it. Wanru looked at him and asked in confusion, "Dwener, what's wrong?" Li Duan asked in confusion, "Should I call her aunt or mother?" Wanru's face turned red. Rui walked to his side and said, "You'll have to call her mother in the future." Li Duan nodded, not really understanding what she meant. "Mother." He looked up at Wanru and called out with a smile. Indeed, there was no difference between aunt and mother. Wanru's aunt became mother when she came back with his father. Little aunt should also become mother when she came back with his father, right? She would not spank him in the future, would she? Then he ran to Mississippi Lou's side and said happily, "Mother." The room suddenly became a little quiet. Wanru looked at Li Yi and quickly looked away. Ruoqing and Zumo looked over in confusion. Xiao Huan was stunned, and then a happy expression appeared on her face. Rui looked at Li Duan, shook her head and said, "Dwener, have you even forgotten your aunt?" A trace of panic appeared on Mississippi Lou's face, but she quickly calmed down. She picked up Li Duan and said, "I'll go out and talk to Dwener. He will remember soon." Li Duan was spanked and ran away with his hands covering his butt. He no longer dared to call Rui mother. When only he and Rui were left in the room, Rui picked up the horsetail whisk and said, "I just thought of something when I heard you say it." When father was still alive, he mentioned it a few times. At that time, Rui was still young and may not remember. Rui sat on the bed and said, "Father said that when he was young, he went out to wander in Jianghu and once met a woman. He said that the woman was carrying something very heavy on her back. They were not the same people, and then it was left unsettled." Rui carefully put down the horsetail whisk and said, "I was not old at that time and didn't understand what father said. I didn't expect that the Taoist priest was the woman that father met back then." Rui didn't know much, and Li Yi only heard a few words, not a vigorous love and hatred. Li Yi held her hand and said, "The dead are gone. Let the past be the past." Rui nodded. Li Yi looked out of the window for a long time and then looked back at Rui with a serious expression. He held her hand and said, "When we were in Victory State, something happened." He decided to tell Rui about it as soon as possible. He couldn't leave this problem to Rui. Rui looked at him and asked, "You want to talk about Rui, right?" At this moment, the feeling in Li Yi's heart was hard to describe with words. He looked at Rui, and there seemed to be thousands of thoughts in his heart. He thought for a long time, opened his mouth, but still didn't say anything. Rui smiled and said, "Becoming a supreme power is Rui's wish since she was young. I'm happy for her." Li Yi shook his head and said, "I'm not talking about Rui's breakthrough." Rui looked at him and shook her head slightly. She said, "Let me finish first, husband." Li Yi nodded. "Rui is 2 years younger than me. We grew up together. My father and mother passed away early, so I had to take care of her since she was young. I gave in to her in everything and didn't want her to suffer any grievances, but, actually, all along, it wasn't me who gave in to her." Rui tightened her grip on his hand and said, "Rui has been stubborn since she was young. Sometimes, she doesn't even listen to her father, but she has always listened to me. I don't need to give in to her at all, because she won't fight with me for anything." At that time, father came back to buy pastries. She clearly liked them, but she always pretended that she didn't like them and left the last piece for me. Her favorite autumn water was actually left for me by father. I knew she liked it, so I didn't dare to show even a little bit of liking. Because as long as I liked it, she definitely wouldn't want it. Rui held his hand even more tightly and said, "Actually, all along, it was she who gave way to me." Li Yi's hand hurt a little. This was a sign that Rui had lost control of her emotions. This was the first time she had said these words to him, and it was also the first time she had lost control of her emotions. "Actually, she's more like a sister than I am." 2 streams of tears rolled down Rui's face. She leaned against Li Yi's chest and continued, "She gave everything she liked to me. She gave the Grandmaster title to me. She gave the husband to me. She could have broken through to the Grandmaster stage earlier. She could have met the husband earlier. We promised when we were young that we would marry the same person in the future." When Rui said this, Li Yi's chest was already wet. She sobbed, "I'm the selfish one. I'm the one who didn't keep my promise. I'm the one who didn't keep my promise." Rui was already sobbing in his arms. Li Yi reached out and hugged her tightly. In a room across the courtyard, Mississippi Lou sat in front of the table. Although she didn't say anything, tears were already streaming down her face. Chapter 1147. Marrying the same husband was just a promise made by Rui and Rui when they were young. It didn't count. Li Yi of course wouldn't use this reason to convince Rui. They both wanted to give their best things to each other. Li Yi wasn't a good thing and he didn't want them to give him away. Being able to marry Rui was already the luckiest thing in his life. At the same time, he also got to know Rui. The heavens had treated him badly in his previous life, but he had made up for it in this life. The heavens had treated him well, so he had to cherish it. Rui leaned on his chest. It didn't take long for him to hear her breathing. In these years, no matter how big the difficulties and obstacles were, she could calmly deal with them. Most of the time, she was even calmer than Li Yi himself. It wasn't until that moment that Li Yi realized that he had never truly understood Rui. He gently placed her on the bed and covered her with a blanket. She had just gone through a series of emotional ups and downs. She needed a good rest. Li Yi walked out of the room and came to the courtyard. He thought for a moment, then walked out of the door and into another courtyard. He walked to the door of a room in the courtyard and knocked on the door. No one answered. The door was unlatched. He pushed the door open and found that Mississippi Lou wasn't in the room. There was a piece of paper on the table with a line of words written on it. "I'm going out for a walk, no need to look for me." Her words were very elegant. She didn't stick to any kind of script. Just like her, free and easy. Rui left. She didn't say where she was going or when she would be back. Of course, Li Yi could still get news of her through Lu Meng and the brothel. She didn't deliberately hide her whereabouts. It's just that the news needed time to be transmitted. Li Yi would always get news of her from a month ago. It was already the 10th month of the 4th year of Jingping. In the past few months, many things had happened. Ruoqing had already taken control of the holy religion and became the one and only Empress of Heaven. In the Qi Kingdom, Zhao Yi officially ascended the throne. After he ascended the throne, he began to clean up the remaining rebel forces within the borders of the Qi Kingdom with a thunderous momentum. In the 9th month of the same year, Yang Liuqing personally led an army of 300,000. They destroyed every city they came across, advancing like a hot knife through butter, heading straight for the imperial capital of the Wu Kingdom. There was another legend in the Jianghu of the Jing Kingdom. There was a chivalrous woman who was highly skilled in martial arts. She was dressed in white and wielded a sword. She punished the strong and eliminated the evil, sweeping away all the injustices in the world. It was unknown how many people who used their power to bully others fell into her hands. She fought the underworld and punished the corrupt officials, gaining the unanimous approval of the common people. The name of the White Fairy was unparalleled among the common people. Li Yi held Li Jin in his arms. Li Duan and Li Mu moved a small stool and sat in front of him, listening to him tell the story of the fairy in white. Li Jin was still young, so she naturally did not understand. But she still lay quietly in Li Yi's arms, blinking her big eyes and looking at him. It was in the nature of a child to play. Soon, he became restless. Yong Ning carried him to find Ruoqing. Li Duan pulled Li Mu to the side. He, who had made great progress in his lightness skill, could not wait to show how he could jump to the top of the wall. Both the brothel and the martial arts world were under her control. Therefore, the news that the famous White Fairy in Jianghu was the current leader of the martial arts world was not widely spread. It was only spread in a small circle. It had always been Rui's dream to be a chivalrous woman. Apart from being the king of mountain bandits, her dream was to overturn the whole Jianghu with one sword. During this period, almost every 2 days, there would be news of her deeds reaching Li Yi's ears. He sat in the yard, looking into the distance. "Husband," Rui walked over and sat beside him. She said, "Go and find Rui." "Husband." Xiao Huan had not changed the way she addressed him. She held his arm and whispered, "I miss Second Lady, too." Li Yi looked at them and then at Ruoqing and the other two standing beside him. He stood up and said, "Wait for me to come back." In the capital of the Jing Kingdom. In the past few years, the people in the capital had been living happily. If the happiness index of the people in each country was ranked, the people in the capital would be ranked second. No other country could be ranked first. The Wu Kingdom. The Wu Kingdom, needless to say, had been divided a few years ago. Until now, it had not been completely unified. The people were troubled by war. The Qi Kingdom. The Qi Kingdom used to be powerful. But now, the Jing Kingdom had already completed its counterattack. Moreover, the emperor of the Qi Kingdom died a few days ago. The two princes fought for the throne and lost a lot of blood. Many people died. The Qi Kingdom could not be compared with the Jing Kingdom. As for the other small countries around, they did not even need to be compared. The words, "live and work in peace and prosperity," were no longer enough to describe the people in the capital. After their material lives were greatly satisfied, they gradually began to pursue higher spiritual enjoyment. Ordinary dramas and stories could no longer satisfy the needs of the people in the capital. The brothel improved in time and introduced various kinds of activities to attract the attention of the people. Until now, the voice of the capital had been held 3 times in a row. Each time it was a great success. The second Jing Kingdom's talent show had also entered the final stage of preparation and was about to be shown to everyone. As early as a few years ago, the capital had become the largest and most prosperous city in the Jing Kingdom and the surrounding countries. In the past few years, it had been on this road without turning back, leaving the other cities far behind. In the hibiscus garden, Li Xian gave a long stretch. He looked at Li Han beside him and said, "Not bad, you handled these matters very well. However, there are still a few small flaws. You should ask my royal sister for guidance on matters of court politics." Li Han was a little hesitant. He said, "Royal brother, regarding matters of court affairs, royal brother and royal sister can handle them very well. Why do I also need to? Royal brother and royal sister can help you for a while, but can they help you for a lifetime?" Li Xian frowned and said, "A man must be brave enough to take responsibility. Royal brother is doing this for your own good. Do you understand?" "I understand." Li Han could only nod. If he did not nod, royal brother would marry the daughter of the Wang family to him. In this way, Duan Wu would not care about him. He really did not know why royal brother wanted him to do all these things, but he could only pretend to understand. On the other side, a woman who had just finished practicing, took a bath, and changed into a new set of clothes walked into a large hall. When she saw the 2 people in the hall, she immediately walked forward and bowed. "Ning, greets Empress Dowager and Mother." A woman touched her head and said, "How many times have I told you? Why is the little girl still so polite?" The woman smiled and said, "Empress, Bing Ning is not little anymore. I am no longer a little girl. You are not little anymore." The Empress Dowager looked at her and said, "Your 18th birthday has passed so long ago. When your mother was your age, you could already run on the ground." The woman stuck out her tongue. She knew that she had said the wrong thing and immediately shut her mouth. The Empress Dowager looked at her and said, 2 years ago is fine, but your marriage can't be delayed anymore. There are so many young talents in the capital. Is there not a single one that can catch our Bing Ning's eyes?" The woman hugged her arm and said, "I just want to accompany royal sister and mother for a few more years." The Empress Dowager shook her head and said, "You are a princess. Every move you make is being watched. A princess of the royal family who is not married after 18, what will outsiders think?" The woman looked at the other woman with a pleading gaze. Every time this happened, it was the time for her mother to help her out of trouble. However, this time, imperial concubine Yan did not help her. The Empress Dowager is right. You are not young anymore. Marriage can't be delayed anymore. She looked at Shawning and said, "Since you don't know how to choose, this matter will be decided by mother." She thought for a moment and said again, "It is not so easy to marry a princess of the royal family. Why don't we let His Majesty prepare a competition to find a husband for her? Let's gather all the talents in the world and choose the most virtuous and talented person." The Empress Dowager thought for a moment and nodded. She said, "This is a good idea." Imperial concubine Yen looked at the woman whose face had turned pale and said, "In the vast Jing kingdom, no one can compare to Jiang of Silla in terms of talent. Ning, why don't you write a letter to that teacher of yours? If he comes back to be the judge, it will be for the best." Chapter 1148. Mother. Shawning's face turned pale. Her mother doted on her the most. When her ladyship urged her to get married, she always stood by her side. But this time, she pulled concubine Yan's hand and shook her head. "Mother, I don't want to get married yet." This time, concubine Yan did not let her have her way. She shook her head. "Ning, you've grown up. You can't just think about yourself. You have to consider the face of the royal family. This matter is decided. Her ladyship and I will go find your brother in a while." Since her mother had spoken like this, there was no turning back. Shawning looked at her in disbelief. She bit her lips and ran out of the palace. Inside the palace, the woman beside concubine Yen shook her head. "She will understand our intentions in the future." Concubine Yen, who was already an old concubine, turned to look at the Empress Dowager. Ning is already 18 years old. According to the marriage laws of the Jing Kingdom, she is at the right age to get married. It won't be too late to delay it for another 2 years. But for Emingzu, I'll have to spend more effort. Speaking of Emingzu, a helpless expression appeared on the woman's face. Sister, it's not like you don't know. With Mingzhu's personality, unless she wants to get married, no one can force her. She sighed and said, to tell you the truth, Ning Wang and Ning Wang have already urged me countless times on this matter. Concubine Yen only smiled. That's true. If Emingzu doesn't want to do something, even His Majesty can't force her. However, I feel that Emingzu already has a plan in mind. We don't have to worry, even if she already has a plan, she should tell us. I'll talk to her in a few days. The woman shook her head helplessly. This matter needs to be discussed at length. As for Ning's matter, I need Xian to make arrangements as soon as possible. Hibiscus Garden had become a second palace a few years ago. In reality, other than the morning court and the regular ceremonies, the original palace was no longer of much use. Of course, most of the imperial guards guarding the palace had been transferred to Hibiscus Garden. The imperial guards didn't patrol Hibiscus Garden at a fixed time. From the outside to the inside, the frequency of their patrols varied from day to day. The academy had provided hundreds of algorithms, and each day, a random one would be chosen. In principle, no one would be able to figure out the patrolling pattern of the imperial guards, and naturally, no one would be able to barge in from the outside. A group of imperial guards had just patrolled past one of the palace walls. In less than the time it took for half an incense stick to burn, they returned from another direction. After their figures disappeared for the second time, a small bundle was thrown out from the palace wall. Then, a figure lightly floated over the courtyard wall and landed steadily on the ground. The woman clapped her hands. Just as she was about to look for the bundle she had just thrown over, she discovered that her bundle was being held by a gray-robed old man. The old man held a bundle in his hand as he looked at the woman in tight clothes in front of him and asked, "Your Highness, where are you going?" Shanning looked at him and calmly walked to his side. She took the bundle from his hand and said, "I'm going to the academy." "Are you going to stop me?" The old man looked at her and asked, "Your Highness, if you want to go to the academy, why don't you go through the main entrance? This is my home. I can go wherever I want. Can't I practice lightness skills?" Shou Ning looked at him for a moment, then began to walk forward. The old man appeared in front of her again. The old man calmly said, "The old princess has ordered that before His Majesty chooses a suitable husband for you, you cannot leave this place." Shanning went left, and so did the old man. Shanning went right, and so did the old man. Shanning looked at him and knew that with her abilities, she was far from being a match for this grey-robed minister. Her face showed a discouraged expression and she threw the bundle back. Watching her climb over the palace wall again, the old man stood in the same place and did not move. Half an hour later, that familiar little bundle was thrown over from within the palace walls again. The old man reached out to catch the bundle and casually threw it back. On the other side of the palace wall, Shanning, who had been preparing to climb over again, took the bundle that had flown back. She stomped her feet angrily and left while muttering. When she returned to her palace, Li Xian was already waiting there. Seeing her sit down angrily, Li Xian walked over and said, "It's not easy for me to refuse the Empress Dowager and the old princess's request. Don't blame me, you're all bullying me." Shanning glanced at him and said angrily, "I'm going to write a letter to Sir. He won't let you bully me." Li Xian thought for a moment and said, "Then hurry up and write. When you're done, I'll have someone deliver it for you." Shanning gritted her teeth and said, "I'll write it now. Qing and Prefecture, Willow Leaf Village." Today's Willow Leaf Village was no longer what it used to be. From the top of the mountain to the foot of the mountain, wide roads were built. The new Willow Leaf Village was several times larger than the original site. There were many shops and innumerable taverns and brothels. It was very prosperous. However, the original site of the village at the back was protected and outsiders were not allowed to enter. And on the back of the mountain, it was a forbidden area that outsiders were not allowed to enter. In the back of the mountain, Li Yi stuck a horsetail whisk into a grave. At this point, he had completed all the requests of the Taoist nun before she died. Lu Qing. Chang stood behind him and looked at the tombstone that had half sunk into the soil. He said, more than 20 years ago, he alone stirred up a storm of blood in the entire martial arts world. If he hadn't died so early, the martial arts world today would be his. His father-in-law had once dominated the martial arts world, but there were not many people who still remembered his name now. Li Yi burned a few incense sticks on the tombstone before he stood up. The two of them walked back to the official road. A man came forward and said, "Your Highness, the League Master came here half a month ago. There has been news from the brothels in several states these days. I speculate that the League Master should have gone to the capital." "I know." Li Yi nodded. The man took out a letter from his bosom and said, "This letter was sent from Rui City." The letter was sent from Rui City, but it was written by Shaoning. When her letter was sent to Rui City, Li Yi had already left. Rui had someone send this letter over. Li Yi opened the envelope. This letter was very short and the handwriting was a little messy, which meant that she wrote it in a hurry. In the letter, she said that she didn't want to marry yet, but the Empress Dowager and the old princess forced her to choose a husband. Not only did my brother not help her, but he also added fuel to the fire. "Teacher, quickly come and save me." These were the last words she wrote. Changde looked at him and said, "Don't forget what you promised Emperor Xian." "Don't worry." Li Yi nodded and said, "No one can force her to do something she doesn't want to do." The capital, Morning Dew Hall. Although she also had a palace in Hibiscus Garden, when Emingzu handled state affairs during the day, she was still used to staying in the Morning Dew Hall. Behind her, Shaoning was lying on a low couch. Her feet were bare and her calves were raised. As she licked the sugar figurines, she swung her legs back and forth. Li Mingzhu read through a memorial, then turned around and looked behind her. The young talents from all over the world have already arrived in the capital, and the selection of the emperor's son-in-law is about to begin. "Can you still sit still?" Shaoning flipped to a new page of the Mandarin duck handkerchief in front of her and said, "Of course, what's there to be afraid of? In any case, teacher will come and save me." She swallowed the sugar figurines and looked at Emingzu. She blinked and asked, "I haven't seen teacher for many years. Sister, do you want to see him?" Emingzu didn't answer. Shaoning got off the bed and said, "In any case, I want to go with teacher this time." Emingzu shook her head and opened another memorial. But in the next moment, she closed the memorial and looked outside the hall. A white-clothed woman walked in from outside the hall. She looked at her and lightly said, "Long time no see." Chapter 1149. After Hibiscus Garden became the political and power center of the capital city, the original role of the imperial palace gradually declined. However, the imperial palace was still the imperial palace. The security was still tight, and it was almost impossible for an outsider to break in quietly. Even if it was a martial arts master. The woman walked in from outside the hall. Mingzhu did not care that someone had broken into the imperial palace. She looked at her and did not move her eyes away for a long time. "Sister Rui." Shaoning jumped off the bed and ran to her barefoot. She grabbed her arm and asked excitedly, "Sister Rui, you are back. Where is Sir? Is he back? Where is he now?" She ran out of the hall barefoot and looked around. She ran back and asked with disappointment, "Sister Rui, where is Sir?" Mississippi Lu looked at her and said softly, "He is not back yet." Shaoning was a little disappointed. However, she was happy when she thought that Sir would come back sooner or later. She had already seen Sister Rui. Would it be too late to see Sir? Mingzhu stood up and looked at her. She said softly, "Bing Ning, go out for a while. I have something to say to your sister Rui." Shaoning nodded. She looked at her royal sister and Sister Rui. She put on her shoes and walked out of the hall. Mingzhu stood in front of Mississippi Lu. After a moment of silence, she asked, "Are you here to show off?" Mississippi Lou looked at her. Her face was originally calm, but in the next moment, she showed a charming smile. She nodded and said, "Yes, I am here to show off." The two of them were once strong opponents. In terms of looks, they each had their own merits. In terms of martial arts, they were evenly matched. Li Mingzhu had the advantage in terms of her status as Princess Royal, while Lu Rui's breasts were bigger. If one were to consider it carefully, the two of them were even. But now it was different. She still had an advantage because of her status, but she lost in terms of body size. However, this identity was the only thing she could use to show off. Lu Rui had already become a grandmaster. She had taken that important step before her. How could she not know how to take this step when they were both in the same predicament? This meant that she was not only one step ahead of her on the road of martial arts, but also on the road of life. This was related to who was older and who was younger, 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 who was younger and who was younger, who could challenge who. She thought for a moment and asked, "Why didn't he come back with you?" Second young lady Lu did not answer. The atmosphere in the hall fell into silence. Li Mingzhu looked at her and suddenly laughed, saying, "So you haven't won yet?" When Shou Ning returned to the hall, he looked around and asked in confusion, "Royal sister, where is Sister Rui?" Li Mingzhu did not continue reading the memorials. Instead, she walked out of the hall and looked at the clouds in the distant sky. "Let's go." She left. Shaning was even more confused. "But I didn't see her go out just now," and Mingzhu did not continue the topic. She looked at her and asked, "The written exam will begin in 3 days. There are thousands of people participating in the first exam. Why don't you go and take a look at the exam questions?" Shaning patted her head and said, "I almost forgot. I can't let them do whatever they want. I have to come up with some questions myself." After saying that, she ran away quickly. And Mingzhu stood in front of the hall. She looked at the distant sky and the clouds were rolling. A faint smile appeared on her face. It's still not certain who will win or lose. In the Jing Kingdom, the life of the people in the capital city was never boring. This was not only because of the endless new shows and talent shows, but also because they were in the capital city, so there was never a lack of new things around them. The gossip about a third-level official in the imperial court could only be regarded as a spice. It was not even qualified to be a topic of conversation. The love and hatred between Princess Royal and the mysterious Jiang of Silla had been spread among the people in several versions. There were even more versions about the story of His Majesty and Prince Jiang of Silla. In recent months, the Empress Dowager and the old princess were going to choose a husband for Princess Shaning. It became a hot topic in the capital city and lasted for several months. Princess Shaning was definitely a legend in the capital city. Not to mention the popularity of Shaning College in the capital city and even in the whole Jing Kingdom. Her status as the Dean of the Women's College and the President of the Women's Union had made her second only to Princess Royal among the women in the Jing Kingdom. Princess Shaning, who was already 18 years old, was still unmarried. This was extremely rare in the royal family. Of course, Princess Royal was already 24 years old and still single. This was not only rare in the royal family, but also among the common people. However, Princess Royal was a special case in the royal family. Even the most reckless censor did not dare to mention this matter. Although the wealthy families in the capital city were not willing to marry the royal princess, Princess Shaning was an exception. Not only was she beautiful, but she was also very capable. If they could invite Princess Shaning into their family, the family's future would be just around the corner. However, the selection of the emperor's son-in-law in the entire country had completely broken the boundaries of the aristocratic families. Regardless of family background, as long as they were healthy and between 18 and 25 years old, they were qualified to participate in this competition and had the possibility of becoming the prince consort. For most people, this was a chance to reach the sky in a single step. All the men of suitable age in the Jing Kingdom were attracted by this event and traveled thousands of miles to the capital city. In a short period of time, the already bustling capital city was overcrowded with people. All the restaurants and inns were full. Even the villages dozens of miles away from the capital city had temporarily opened their inns. Of course, it was not that easy to become the prince consort. Who was Princess Shou Ning? She was one of the two most dazzling pearls among the princesses of the royal family. Those who wanted to marry her could walk around the capital several times, hand in hand. However, there was only one prince consort. These thousands of people had to go through an extremely cruel competition to have the last laugh. First, they had to pass the written examination. The prince consort might not be the most talented person in the world, but he could not be an idiot either. The first round of the written examination involved poetry, history, and even governance. The final ranking was based on the results. It was absolutely fair and open. In this written examination alone, more than 90% of the people would be eliminated. Only 100 people would be left for the second round of the combat examination. Princess Shou Ning was skilled in both literature and martial arts. Naturally, the prince consort could not only be skilled in literature. He had to be skilled in both literature and martial arts. Only then would he be worthy of the princess. In this combat examination, another 90% of the people would be eliminated. Only 10 people would be left for the final round. It was said that in this final round, not only would the Empress Dowager and the old consort participate, but even the emperor and the eldest princess would also be participating. Even if they could not become the prince consort, they would have no regrets in their lives if they could make it this far. The capital city, outside the city gate. A few silhouettes stood outside the gate. They seemed to have traveled a long way and were covered in dust. The leader was a handsome young man. He was not old and looked to be in his early 20s. Looking at the tall and majestic city walls, he stood there for a long time. His eyes showed a sense of vicissitudes and depth that did not match his age. At the city gate, a fat man who had been looking around for a long time suddenly walked up and asked with a smile, "Brother, are you also here to participate in the selection of the prince consort?" The young man looked away and looked at him. The fat man sneakily looked left and right, patted his bulging belly, and said in a low voice, "Brother, I have the questions for the first round of the written exam here. I see that you and I are fated. I'll sell you one for 10 taels of silver. How about it?" The young man looked at him and smiled. "The selection of the prince consort is a national examination. Where did you get the questions from?" The fat man looked at him and a mysterious expression appeared on his face. He said, "If I am willing to sell it, I naturally have my ways. For 10 taels of silver, you can pass the first written examination. For 10 taels of silver, you can see Princess Shou Ning's beauty. Brother, are you really not going to consider it?" The young man shook his head. 10 taels. The fat man saw that he was tempted and quickly said, "Brother, if you are interested, 8 taels is fine." 8 taels. The fat man gritted his teeth and said, 6 taels, 6 taels, no less." The young man looked at him and thought for a moment. He said, 10 taels. Chapter 1150. As Li Yi walked down the street, he casually flipped through the leaked questions scroll that he had spent 5 copper coins to buy. The writing on it was already extremely blurred, and in some places, even the words could not be seen clearly. It was unknown how many editions had been stolen. Let alone 10 taels of silver, Li Yi even felt that the 5 copper coins he had just spent wasn't worth it. Across from him was a young man who was also holding a similar exam paper. After raising his head to glance at him, he put the exam paper into his bosom as if guarding against a thief and quickly walked away. It seemed that taking advantage of the autumn wind of choosing a son-in-law, quite a few unscrupulous pirate merchants in the capital were going to make a fortune. When Li Duan left the capital, he was still young and had forgotten many of his memories. But some things had been engraved in the depths of his memory and could not be forgotten. He looked at Li Yi and asked, "Father, can I go find Xiaorui now?" Li Yi patted his head and said, "Wait for another 2 days, then we'll go home first." No one knew that they had entered the capital this time. Neither Li Xian nor the old madam had informed them in advance. They did not go directly to the Jiang of Silla Manor but to the Li family. In the capital, the rise and fall of a family was extremely short and without any pattern. There was the Qin family from a few years ago, which was a duke and had been high and lofty for decades. But in a single day, it declined and was no longer mentioned by anyone. There were also a few families that had risen in recent years, such as the Liu family and the Xing family. Originally, they could only be considered second-rate, but in recent years, someone in the family had been promoted and entered the ranks of the imperial court, allowing them to rise to the first-rate. Most of them rose and fell, just like the Li family, from prominence to decline, and then back to prominence. Of course, in the entire capital, the number of families that were as prominent as the Li family's current position could be counted on one hand. In front of the Li family's door, a young servant walked up and sized up the strangers in front of him. "Who are you looking for?" These people looked travel-worn. It was obvious that they had been on the road for a long time. Over the past few years, many people knew that the Li family was prominent, so there were many bad guys who came to meet them. He had to ask them clearly. Without waiting for the other party to answer, his butt was kicked, and he knelt on the ground. "Which king?" He crawled up from the ground with a furious look on his face. However, when he turned his head, his expression melted like ice and snow. He said with a smile, "Butler Li, why are you blind?" The old man fiercely kicked his butt and quickly walked forward with an excited look on his face. "Young master, you're finally back." Li Yi nodded and smiled. "Uncle Li, long time no see." The Li family. Li Duan stood upright in the hall and knelt on the ground. He kowtowed to the two old people several times and said, "Greetings great-grandmother, greetings great-grandmother. Duaner, come here quickly. Let great-grandmother have a good look at you." Madame Dowager was already very excited. Without waiting for him to get up, she stood up from the chair, took his hand, and looked him up and down. "I haven't seen you for a few years. Duaner has grown so much." The two old ladies had always been healthy, and all their attention was on Li Duan. When he left the capital last time, Li Duan had just learned how to walk. Now, he could easily jump over the wall and tear down the roof tiles. After a long time, Madame Dowager held Li Yi's hand and said, "When Rui came back 2 days ago, I knew that you were probably coming back." Li Yi looked at Madame Dowager and asked, "Where is Rui now?" "She came back to take a look and left." Madame Dowager looked at him and asked, "How long will you stay in the capital this time?" Li Yi smiled and said, "I'm not sure yet. But this time, I plan to bring grandmother with me. Shuzhou is not much worse than the capital now." Madame Dowager nodded and said, "Yes, I want to go and see my precious great-granddaughter. She has been in the capital all her life and has long been tired of it." She thought about it and said, "Do you want me to send someone to inform His Majesty and the princess?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "Don't inform them yet. In a few days, I will personally tell them." Li Yi didn't want to make such a big fuss at the moment. Once the news of his return to the capital was announced, who knew how many people in the capital would not be able to sleep? And at this juncture, it was not suitable to announce it. The matter of the prince consort this time had already caused an uproar in the entire capital and even the Jing kingdom. Shaning could not be married. The former emperor had said that other than herself, no one had the right to decide her affairs. But now that things had come to this, even if the former emperor was brought up, it would still be the royal family that would lose face. He could also directly take Shaning away and let Li Xian deal with this mess. After all, he was the one who caused the trouble. But this, in the end, was not the best choice. After tricking Li Xian for so many years, it was better to let him go this time. Chang quietly came to his side and asked, "Tomorrow is the day of the written examination. What do you plan to do?" Before the former emperor died, he had given him 3 orders. These 3 orders were for Yongning, Shaning, and Emingzu. Chang was the supervisor of these 3 orders. "What do I plan to do?" Li Yi thought about it. Robbing and stealing seemed to be out of the question, so he could only rely on his own ability, the Ministry of Rights. The selection of the emperor's son-in-law was supervised by the Ministry of Rights. All the young talents participating in the competition had to first register at the Ministry of Rights. At the yamen of the Ministry of Rights, an official looked at the young man and the old man in front of him. He frowned and said, "Tomorrow is the day of the written examination. The examination papers have already been printed and the venue has already been arranged. Now you are telling me to register? Where have you been?" The young man looked at the official with a smile and said, "Sir, we came from the faraway Shu province. We were delayed on the way and only arrived today. We missed the registration date. It was not easy for us to come here. I hope you can make an exception." "Make an exception?" The official shook his head and said, "Missing the registration date means you are not fated with Her Highness. Go back to where you came from." Li Yi took out a stack of silver notes from his sleeve and secretly handed it over. He said, "Sir, please make an exception." The official glanced at it and estimated it to be a few thousand taels. His heart shook and he was about to reach out his hand when the old man next to the young man grabbed his wrist. The old man looked at him and said in a cold voice, "As an important member of the Ministry of Rights, you dare to accept bribes?" The official's eyelids twitched. He finally realized that these two people had come today to make fun of him. His expression darkened. He said, "Which eye of yours saw me accept bribes? You too have missed the registration. Hurry up and leave. Otherwise, I will have people kick you out." Chang hooked his arm around the official's neck and pulled him to the side. When they walked out again, the official's forehead was covered in cold sweat. He looked at Li Yi and said in a trembling voice, Young master, please wait a moment. I will immediately arrange for you." Seeing the official's expression, Li Yi knew that Chang was taking advantage of his position to bully people again. He had created the Intelligence Bureau. Although he had completely let go of it, he still had countless methods to make a lowly official from the Ministry of Rights listen to him. Of course, if it wasn't for the fact that Li Yi was wearing a mask today, his face alone would be enough for him to pass through all the yamens in the capital unimpeded. When he came out of the Ministry of Rights, he had already received the number plate for tomorrow's written exam. This written exam took up almost all the classrooms in the capital. The number plate in Li Yi's hand had already reached more than 100. It could be seen just how many people were participating in this written exam. Chang was not worried about this. Although Jiang of Silla never knew how to be shameless when he boasted, he had to admit that no one could beat him in this kind of competition, whether it was in literature or martial arts. After leaving the yamen of the Ministry of Rights, another few hundred meters was the palace wall. Li Yi stood on the wide street and looked at the familiar palace wall in the distance. He turned his head and said to Chang, "You go back first. Lend me the plate just now, Morning Dew Hall." Mingzu was flipping through the memorials from the Ministry of Rights regarding the selection of the son-in-law. A palace maid came in from outside and said in a low voice, "Your Highness, it's time to eat." Mingzu didn't raise her head and said, "Put it down first." "Yes." The palace maid responded and waved her hand. A few palace maids came in and placed the lunch that had just been sent over on the table. She was used to finishing her work before eating. But this time, when she continued to flip through the memorials, her hands suddenly stopped. She lightly sniffed and looked at the table to the side. On the table, other than the usual dishes, there was also a golden plate of egg-fried rice. She hadn't eaten egg-fried rice in 5 years, but she could never forget this familiar taste. She put down the memorials and walked over. She picked up the spoon and took a small bite. She combed a strand of messy hair in her hair and a smile appeared on her face. Chapter 1151. Li Yi had been away from the capital for 5 years, and the capital had undergone earth-shattering changes. These changes were not only visible on the outside. Some of the landmark buildings were still there, but he was no longer familiar with most of the streets. The new generation had replaced the old in the court. The former Minister of Revenue, Qin Huan, had resigned due to illness 3 years ago, and Xing Shichen had replaced him. The Ministry of Revenue was busy and could not afford to be distracted. After becoming the Minister of Revenue, Xing Shichen naturally could not hold the position of the capital governor. The capital governor, Lu Daio's daughter-in-law of many years, had finally become a mother-in-law. With her keen political sense, she had become the capital governor as she wished. In addition, the Minister of Justice had also resigned due to illness, and the former Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice, Louis, had temporarily replaced him. This period lasted for 2 years. His second uncle, Li Mingzi, did not become the Minister of the Ministry of Personnel, but was transferred to the central government of the 3 provinces. At his age, there was still hope for him to be promoted in his future career. The old generals in the court also resigned one after another in the first year after the former emperor's death. During these 5 years, many young generals had been trained for the Jing kingdom through the military academy. Li Yi had received this information over the years. What he was looking at now was the tidying up of the intelligence reports over the years. Li Duan walked out from inside and walked to his side. Suddenly, he smelled a familiar fragrance. He sniffed and said, "Dad, I want to eat egg fried rice." Li Yi put down the things in his hands, stood up, and walked to the kitchen. Li Duan happily followed behind and said, "Dad, can I let Xiao Rui taste your cooking in the future?" The 6-year-old Li Duan could already read. In these 2 years, he and Xiao Rui had exchanged letters. Of course, most of the time, it was him who spoke and Li Yi who wrote. The content of the letters was very childish. It was mostly about how much he had grown and how he could jump from the ground to the top of the wall. He also promised to show it to her when they met in the future. Li Yi took out the steamed rice and casually asked, "Duaner, do you want Xiao Rui to be your wife in the future?" "Of course." Li Duan nodded his head vigorously and said, "We've agreed that when we grow up, I'll marry her so that we can always play together." "If that's the case." Li Yi thought for a moment and said, "Then why don't you make your own egg fried rice for little Rui to eat? If little Rui likes to eat the rice you make, she will often come to find you." Li Duan had a pensive look on his face, as if he was considering it. After thinking for a while, he walked to Li Yi and said, "Dad, teach me how to cook." Li Yi handed him an egg and said, "Crack this egg first. If you want to capture a woman's heart, you must first capture a woman's stomach." This was a principle that Li Yi wanted to teach Li Duan. The men of the Li family could be useless in other things, but they couldn't not know how to cook. After eating his egg-fried rice, Mingzi couldn't eat other people's cooking. She couldn't leave him for the rest of her life. This was the best example. When Li Xian wanted Li Duan and little Rui to be betrothed, he didn't agree. However, the 2 children grew up together. If they really liked each other, he wouldn't stop them. If Li Xian made similar requests in the future, he could consider agreeing first. After all, Li Xian was very experienced in giving birth to daughters. He had already given birth to 3 daughters in succession, 4th year of Jingping, 5th of November. Today was the first day of Princess Shanning's husband selection. Li Yi was wearing the mask that Su Zheng had prepared for him. When he walked out of the door, he saw 2 people coming in from outside. The 17-year-old Duan Wu had already become slender and elegant. She was no longer the plain girl he first met. Li Han was also not as fat as before. The genes of the Li Xian family were very good. Among the princes and princesses, none of them were ugly. The 17-year-old Li Han's childishness had long faded. He was a graceful and beautiful young man. However, the beautiful young man looked anxious at the moment. As he chased after the girl in front of him, he explained, "Duan Wu, believe me. I really have nothing to do with that sister of the Wang family. She just treats me as a brother. She treats you as a brother or something else. What does it have to do with me?" Duan Wu glanced at him and walked into the house. When she saw Li Yi coming out from inside, a happy expression appeared on her face. She hurried over, but stopped halfway. Only then did she remember that the news of her brother's return couldn't be told to anyone. Li Yi rubbed her head and realized that the girl now was no longer the little girl from before. As soon as he let go of his hand, a voice came to his ears. Li Han stood in front of Duan Wu and looked at Li Yi. He said with vigilance, "Who are you?" Duan Wu came out from behind him and said with dissatisfaction, "Li Han, what are you doing?" Li Yi looked at him and asked, "Do you like my sister?" Duan Wu blushed and twisted her hands together. She whispered, "Brother, Li Han was startled and asked, "You are Duan Wu's brother?" Li Yi nodded his head and said, "Although you are Prince Jin, if you want to pursue my sister, you still have to pass through me first." Although Li Han didn't know where Duan Wu's brother came from, at this time, of course, he couldn't be weak. He straightened his chest and asked, "What do you want me to pass?" "I recently encountered a difficult problem in mathematics. As long as you can solve it, I will allow you to pursue my sister." Li Han almost laughed in his heart. It seemed that Duan Wu's brother still didn't know that he was the dean of the mathematics school. In the whole capital, the whole Jing kingdom, and the whole world, who was he afraid of? He was afraid of one person, but that person wasn't in the capital. He wasn't here, so the field of mathematics was his, Li Han's, world. He looked at Li Yi and said with a smile, "What is the problem? Tell me." "It's very simple. You just need to help me prove that any even number greater than 2 can be written as the sum of 2 prime numbers." Li Yi looked at him and said, "I still have some things to do. When this problem is proven, come back here to find me." After Li Yi finished speaking, he turned around and walked out. If he delayed any longer, he would miss the first written exam. There were a lot of people participating in this written exam. Just the exam venue alone, there were more than 100, and it involved more than 10 academies in the capital. Coincidentally, Li Yi's exam venue was Shawning Academy. This was the academy that he had given to Shawning many years ago. He entered the academy, took out his token, found the classroom, and walked in. The exam had not started yet. There were about 40 to 50 people in the exam venue. They were all sitting at their desks, looking straight ahead, quietly waiting for the exam to start. "Brother, do you want the latest version of the secret prediction scroll?" Not long after Li Yi sat down, he suddenly heard a voice. He turned his head and saw a fat man. The fat man saw him and exclaimed, "It's you." Li Yi had a deep impression of this fat man. This was because when he first arrived in the capital, before he even stepped through the city gates, he was sold a set of leaked secret scrolls. The fat man had an even deeper impression of him. The person in front of him was the only one who bought a secret scroll that was worth 10 taels of silver from him for 5 copper coins. Li Yi looked at him and asked, "What, there's a new secret prediction scroll?" This fat man was also a talent. He could actually sneak into the exam venue and sell fake exam papers to the examinees. He realized that all the fat men he knew were good at doing business. Li Yi looked at him and said, "Same rules, one price, 5 copper coins." The fat man looked at him and silently walked to the front of an examinee. He asked in a low voice, "Brother, the latest version of the secret prediction scroll is sold cheaply for 10 taels of silver. Do you want it?" That person turned his head to look at him and said in surprise, "There really is a secret prediction scroll? Really?" This fatty clearly had a nimble tongue. He was extremely eloquent, and his tongue was like a lotus flower. After circling around the exam hall, his bulging belly actually reduced a bit. He walked in front of Li Yi again and pulled out a test paper from his belly. He said, "This is the last one. 5 words it is." Li Yi touched the cuffs of his waist and looked at him. He said, "I'm sorry, I didn't bring any money with me." The fat man angrily sat down next to Li Yi and didn't say another word. 5 copper coins was fine, but he actually wanted to take it for free. He had seen black-hearted people, but he had never seen someone as black-hearted as himself. Just as he sat down, an examiner came in from outside. He scanned the crowd and said seriously, "Anything unrelated to the exam, put it all at the front. If it is discovered during the exam, it will be treated as cheating and your right to take the exam will be revoked." Li Yi looked at those people dejectedly put the papers they had just bought on the table. A few more people walked down and carefully checked the papers. The examiner then cleared his throat and announced, "The written exam will now begin." Chapter 1152. All the academies in the capital city heard the bell ringing from the imperial palace. The written exam officially began. Li Yi had already received his exam paper. The questions on the paper covered a wide range of topics, including poetry, classics, governance, and even science. However, the first few questions on the paper made Li Yi smile. Without thinking, he picked up the pen and began to write. However, when the other examinees received the paper and skimmed through it, their hearts immediately sank. They cursed the fat man who had just sold them the paper. Damn it, they had spent dozens of taels of silver on the secret test paper, but none of the questions were correct. What was more hateful was that in order to memorize the questions on the secret test paper, they had already stayed up for several nights. They might as well not have bought it. However, they did not dare to curse for too long in their hearts. After all, the exam only lasted for 4 hours. All the grudges would be settled after the exam. When they were about to answer the questions, they were stunned again. The first question, ignoring air resistance: if 2 stones, one light and one heavy, fall from the same height, which one will land first? There were 4 options below. A. The heavy one. B. The light one. C. The 2 will land at the same time. D. I don't know. The second question: Wang Xiaoming's father had 3 sons. The eldest son was called Dumao, the second son was called Ermao, and what was the third son's name? There were 4 options below as well. A. Sanmao. B. Formao. C. 50. D. Wang Xiaoming. The third question was very simple. There was only one sentence: how many plum trees were planted in Hibiscus Garden? The first question was needless to say. 2 stones fell at the same time. This was verified by the emperor himself, so they could not get it wrong. The second question seemed inexplicable, but it was actually a math question. The eldest son was called Dumao, the second son was called Ermao, and the third son was definitely called Sanmao. As for the third question, how would they know how many plum trees were planted in Hibiscus Garden? The third question was skipped. Fortunately, the following questions were starting to move in a normal direction. Time was limited, so the examinees began to write quickly. Outside the examination room, there were also examiners gathered together to analyze a paper. They were satisfied with the overall quality of the paper, but they were also helpless about the first 3 questions. The first 2 questions were set by the emperor himself, so they did not dare to raise any objections. The question of the 2 stones falling to the ground had already been decided. If anyone still answered incorrectly, they would have to suspect that they were spies sent by other countries. Even if they were not, they would be too ignorant and disrespectful to His Majesty if they did not even know the famous law of free fall. Therefore, anyone who answered incorrectly on the first question would be directly eliminated. As for the second question, they could only interpret it as saying that the person who answered this question incorrectly might have something wrong with his head. And geniuses with brain problems would naturally not be able to marry princesses. Those who answered this question incorrectly would also be directly eliminated. The third question was set by Princess Xiaoning herself. They did not know how many plum trees were in Hibiscus Garden. They did not know how many plum trees there were in Hibiscus Garden. They did not know how many plum trees in Hibiscus Garden, but this question had no. If one answered the first 2 questions correctly, he would be able to proceed to the combat test directly, no matter how he answered the rest of the questions correctly. If they were, and would, they would palace. Academy, and would. Emperor would, and dynasty. There was an 80% chance that he would eliminate the person who answered the question incorrectly. As for the third question, there was no doubt that it was set by Xiaoning. In her previous letters, she had said that she had given each of the 36 plum trees in Hibiscus Garden a name. She had already been very restrained by not asking these people what the 10th plum tree was called. He spaced out for a while, then continued to answer. Not far from him, the fat man bit the shaft of his pen, lost in thought. He didn't take the exam to marry the princess, but to make money by selling fake exam papers. Therefore, he did not intend to answer. However, if he handed in a blank paper, would he be arrested for disrespecting the princess? He couldn't take this risk, but he also couldn't answer too well. If he passed the written exam, he would definitely be beaten to death by those who had spent a lot of money to buy his exam papers. To be safe, he would only answer the first 3 questions. He picked up his pen and looked at the first question. Ignoring air resistance, if 2 stones, one light and one heavy, fell from the same height, which one would land first? There was no need to choose, it must be the heavy one. However, to be safe, he still intended to choose the wrong one. Choosing the heavy one was right, but choosing the light one seemed to be a bit too stupid. He didn't know if it was a bit too perfunctory, so he just randomly chose the one that landed at the same time. After choosing the C option, he continued to look at the next question. Wang Xiaoming's father had 3 sons. The eldest son was called Damao, the second son was called Ermao, and what was the third son's name? He was a bit suspicious of the intention of the person who came up with the questions. 2 consecutive free marks questions would not be able to pull everyone apart. The eldest son was called Damao, the second son was called Ermao, and the third son was definitely called Sanmao. The one who chose 45 was because he had never studied mathematics. To be safe, he still had to answer this question incorrectly. Well, he would choose Wang Xiaoming. When he saw the third question, he finally frowned. How would he know how many plum trees there were in Hibiscus Garden? When he was about to fill in a random number, he turned to look at the stingy guy beside him and happened to see his answer. 36. He wrote 36 on the bar, then got up, handed in his paper, and left the examination room. If he left late, he was afraid that he would be surrounded outside and beaten to death. In less than the time it took to drink a cup of tea, some people handed in their papers early and left the examination room, causing a commotion in the examination room. Li Yi was not disturbed. Although most of these questions relied on memory and could be solved by cheating, it still took a lot of time to finish all the questions. 2 hours later, the bell rang again, and all the examination rooms in the capital handed in their papers at the same time. Everyone walked out of the examination room, some frowning, and some high-spirited. Hey, I didn't finish, I almost finished it. Who knows how many plum trees there are in Hibiscus Garden? What about the fat guy who sold the papers? He didn't get a single question right. I'll beat him to death. Is there a mistake in the second question? Damao, Ermao, Sanmao, and Wang Xiaoming, shouldn't there be 4 sons? How can it be 3? I pointed out the mistake in the question. Do you think they will give me extra marks? The imperial court placed great importance on the theory examination this time. After the examination ended, the imperial army would immediately transport all the examination papers to the palace. There would be nearly 100 teachers from the academy who would finish grading all the examination papers within a day. According to the rankings, the 100 talents who would enter the wushu examination would be selected. In Hibiscus Garden, Shou Ning looked at his imperial mother and said with dissatisfaction, "It's clearly me choosing the emperor's son-in-law, but I can only come up with half a question. Even imperial brother can come up with 2 questions. This is not fair." Concubine Yen looked at her and said, "If you didn't ask them what the name of the 10th plum tree in Hibiscus Garden is, you could also give 2 more questions." A eunuch came in with a tray and said respectfully, "Concubine Yen, all the papers have been marked. The papers of the top 100 are all here." Concubine Yen took out a paper and frowned. Looking at the blank paper, she asked, "What's going on?" The eunuch bowed and said, "Concubine Yen, although this person only answered 3 questions, he is one of the 2 who answered the first 3 questions correctly. According to the rules, he can enter the wushu examination directly." Concubine Yen thought for a while and asked, "Who is the other person?" "The other person is the only one who answered all the questions and got full marks." The eunuch said respectfully, "He is the first in this written examination." "What's his name?" "Mu Zi." "Mu Zi." Shaning took a deep breath and walked over. She said, "Where is his paper?" "Show it to me." The eunuch handed her the paper at the top. She took the paper but didn't open it immediately. She even looked away. After taking another deep breath, she slowly opened it. After a long time, she closed the paper and put it back gently. She covered her face and pinched it. Suddenly, she looked at Concubine Yen and asked, "Mother, have I gained weight recently?" Concubine Yen nodded and said, I told you to eat less. Ah. She was shocked. She quickly ran to her room and stood in front of the mirror. She pulled her elastic face and said in distress, I've really gained weight. What should I do? What should I do? After being distressed for a while, a smile appeared on her face again. She threw herself on the bed and rolled around while giggling. As she giggled, she quickly sat up and tidied her clothes and hair. She stood in front of the mirror and smiled like a lady. It was only a day before the written examination. On the high palace wall, there was a huge red list. This was the list of 100 people who passed the written examination and entered the wushu examination. There were thousands of people who participated in the written examination. In the end, there were only 100 people left. Most people just came to take a look and left with a sigh. Naturally, there were also those who were on the list. They stood under the list with a face full of surprise and didn't want to leave for a long time. This Mu Zi is a beast. He even got full marks for that kind of paper. It's not just that. I heard that even Prime Minister Shen and a few officials in the court were full of praise for his political analysis. They said that most of the officials in the court can't compare to him. Also, that poem of his has spread like wildfire in the imperial court. Some people even say that his attainments in poetry are on par with King Jing's. Luckily, there's still the wushu examination. When the time comes, we must unite and get rid of him first. Who is that Peng Er? He's actually ranked second. I've never heard of him before. The capital is really full of hidden talents. Under the imperial list, there was a lot of noise. Some people made it onto the list and laughed wildly. Some people failed, crying and snot. In a corner of the crowd, a fat man looked at the name on the imperial list. His face was ashen and his body was shaking like a sieve. His lips trembled and he couldn't help but mumble, It's shady, shady, shady. Chapter 1153. After the written test, the combat test would be held 7 days later. For 5 consecutive days, Li Yi did not see Li Han even once. According to Duan Wu, Li Han had locked himself in the mathematics school and had not come out for 5 whole days. Prove that any even number greater than 2 can be written as the sum of 2 prime numbers. This question seemed to only have one line of words, but it had troubled the mathematics world for nearly 300 years. This was the world's most famous problem, Goldbach's conjecture, codenamed 1 + 1 = 2. Back then, even Euler, who was known as the greatest mathematician on Earth, could not prove it. Then, this problem caused the mathematics world to study for nearly 300 years. Until the day Li Yi went to the library to freeload, no one had proved it. If Li Han really proved this proposition, Li Yi would worship him and offer him at least 3 sticks of incense every day. It was good for a young man to be confident, but he must not be arrogant. Li Han was very smart, but he had a big weakness. If he did not encounter a setback for a long time, he would become arrogant. After 5 years, if he did not wake up, he would become arrogant. He would not know that there was always someone better than him, and each question would be more difficult than the previous one. Duan Wu grabbed his arm and whispered, Brother, he has been working hard these few days. Don't make it difficult for him. Li Yi nodded and said, Okay. I won't make it difficult for him. Our little Duan Wu also knows how to care about him. Looking at Duan Wu's red face, Li Yi thought that Li Han had grown up these few years. He was no longer the silly little fatty who only knew how to do math. Aunt Duan Wu, I'm here to play with you. A crisp voice rang in Li Yi's ears. Then, a young girl of about 5 or 6 years old ran in from outside. She looked like she was carved from jade. Li Han followed behind her. His eyes were sunken and he looked exhausted. Li Han looked up and stammered, Little Roy came to play with you. I have to look after her. Li Yi still remembered that when they left the capital, Xiao Rui was just like Li Duan, swaying as she walked. When he looked at the little girl at the door again, he couldn't help but feel a little unreal. In the blink of an eye, she had already grown so big. She said that she was here to play with Duan Wu, but in fact, she only stood at the door for a while before running out. It seemed like Li Han's tricks were deeper than he had imagined. Even such a young child was treated as his wingman. Li Han walked over and pursed his lips. He looked at Li Yi and said, "Then, that question, I can't prove it. What should I do?" Li Yi shook his head. "I don't know either." Li Han stared at him with widened eyes. You don't know?" He thought that the reason he said he didn't know was to test him, but he didn't expect that he really didn't know. Could it be that he had spent the past few days studying an unsolvable question without sleep or food? In this world, not every question has an answer. Li Yi looked at him and said, "Don't think that there is no problem in the world that you can't solve just because you have studied mathematics for a few years. Mathematics is far from as simple as you think." How familiar were these words, how familiar was this scene? Li Han looked at the person in front of him and suddenly felt his legs turn to jelly. The same tone, the same words. If it wasn't for the fact that he had never seen this distant cousin of Duan Wu before, he would have thought that it was Sir standing in front of him again. He lowered his head and said with a trembling voice, I know, young master, come down quickly. Young master, be careful, young master, it's dangerous." A few maids from the Li family stood under the tree and raised their heads. Their faces were full of worry, and even their faces were a little pale from fright. "It's okay, it's not high at all." Li Duan looked down and waved his hand. He threw down the kuju from a branch and said, "Go and play. If you kick the tree again, come and call me." He jumped down from the tree and clapped his hands. When he turned around, he found a little girl standing under the porch looking at him. "Who are you? Why have I never seen you before?" The first to speak was the little girl. She saw Li Duan jump down from such a high tree. She was shocked at first, but when she saw him land steadily, she was surprised and envious. Li Duan looked at her and said strangely, "I have never seen you before either." The little girl looked at him and asked again, "Do you know martial arts?" "Of course." Li Duan was a little proud and said, "My martial arts is very powerful. Even the adults can't beat me." The little girl saw his proud look and curled her lips. She thought that Dwainer was definitely more powerful than him. Dwainer said in the letter last time that he could jump from the ground to the wall. However, she wasn't sure who was more powerful between him and Dwainer. She thought for a moment and said, "My little aunt is very powerful. You definitely can't beat her." Li Duan looked at her and asked, unconvinced, "How powerful is your little aunt?" The little girl thought for a moment and pointed to the roof at the side. She said, "My little aunt can fly to the roof in an instant." Li Duan looked at the high roof and felt a little guilty. He could jump down from the roof, but he couldn't jump up from below. If he bragged now and the little girl asked him to prove it, he would lose face. However, he didn't want to show weakness in front of this little girl. He said, "What's so difficult about that? I, Xiaonyang, can also fly to the roof in an instant. Then my big aunt can fly to 2 roofs. My little aunt can fly to 3 roofs. My father can fly to 10 roofs, 100 roofs." The little girl thought for a moment. Her father had a pair of big wings and could fly very high. He must be able to reach 100 roofs. It wasn't a lie. 100? Who didn't know how to brag? Anyway, she was the one who started it. Li Duan thought for a moment and said, "My master can fly to the sun." The little girl's expression froze. She couldn't think of anything higher than the sun. Her father said that the sun was a big fireball. She thought for a moment and asked, "Isn't it hot for your master to fly to the sun?" "Stupid." Li Duan looked at her and said proudly, "Can't we fly at night?" The little girl frowned and said, "That's your master, not you, then you're not talking about you." Li Duan looked at her and said, "I just need to fly higher than you. Can you fly to the tree?" The little girl ran away angrily. This bad guy bullied her. When would Dwainer come back? When Dwainer came back, he would be able to protect her. Li Duan curled his lips. This little girl liked to boast so much at such a young age. When she grew up, she would definitely be a big talker. Little Roy was the best. Her father said that in 2 days, she could go find little Roy. He hadn't seen little Roy for a long time. He wondered what she looked like now. He ran to his room and confirmed with Li Yi that he would see little Roy in 2 days. Only then did he relax. However, he didn't know if his nose was bad these days. Why did he always smell the smell of egg fried rice on his father's body? Several days had passed since Princess Shanning's written examination to choose her husband. Tomorrow was the day of the martial examination. The location of the martial examination was in Hibiscus Garden. Early the next morning, other than Princess Shanning, the Empress Dowager, the old consort, the current emperor, the empress, the noble consort, and the regent, the eldest princess, would all appear. Of course, at that time, the civil and military officials of the court and the nobles of the capital would all enter to observe. This was the largest event in the capital at the end of the 4th year of Jinping. In Hibiscus Garden, Shanning looked at the clothes on the bed and said in distress, "What should I wear tomorrow?" Yan Fei stood behind her and gently knocked her on the head. "After they finish competing tomorrow, you will have to personally go on stage. You can't wear any of these clothes." Ah. Hearing this, Shanning threw herself onto the bed again and muttered, "Then I won't be pretty, what won't you be pretty in?" Yan Fei pinched her face and said, "Go borrow a set of clothes from your sister. You can wear her old training clothes tomorrow." Shanning climbed up from the bed and said, "Aya, since I can't win tomorrow, I might as well wear something nice." Morning Dew Palace. In front of Mingzu was a plate of egg fried rice. The catering bureau hadn't made egg fried rice in 5 years, but these days, every time it was lunch, a plate would be placed in front of her. A female official walked in from outside and bowed. "Your Highness, everything has been arranged." Mingzu nodded. "I understand." The female official hesitated for a moment and asked, "But Princess, tomorrow with His Majesty and the Empress Dowager, what should we do?" "I have my own arrangements," Mingzu said. She picked up a spoon and began to eat. "Yes." The female official nodded and slowly retreated. Somewhere in the capital, a fatty was carrying a bulging bag. When he sneaked out of his house, he was stopped by a group of imperial guards. This fatty, who had answered the first 3 questions correctly, had been specially instructed by his superiors not to make any mistakes. The imperial guard looked at him and asked, "Young Master Peng, tomorrow is the day of the combat examination. Where are you going?" The fatty's bag fell to the ground and his face instantly turned pale. He hugged the imperial guard's leg and cried, "I deserve to die. I'm not human. I won't sell fake goods anymore. Let me go, let me go." Chapter 1154. 7 days ago, there were a total of 100 people who stood out from thousands of other candidates and participated in today's combat examination. The combat examination was held in Hibiscus Garden. The order of the 100 people would be changed and they would be divided into 10 groups. Each group would have 1 winner. As long as they could defeat Princess Shanning, they would become the prince's son-in-law. Of course, if 2 or more people defeated the princess, they would have to compete with each other again. In the end, only 1 son-in-law would be left. As for whether the groups would be unfair or not, there would only be 1 son-in-law. There was no difference between the 2nd and the 100th place. The courtiers were very worried about this. Everyone knew that although Princess Shou Ning was a woman, she was well versed in both the pen and the sword. Her martial arts skills were extremely outstanding. Last year, when the imperial court was recruiting martial arts scholars, she secretly disguised herself as a man and forced her way into the top 10. At that time, the officials had already realized that Princess Shou Ning had few rivals among her peers, even those who were 1 or 2 generations older than her. Those who were more skilled than her had been practicing martial arts for many years and would not be able to participate in the combat examination. Of course, this was something that the prince's son-in-law had to worry about. The officials were happy to see this. In the middle of Hibiscus Garden, there were 10 arenas set up on a large empty plot of land. The officials of the capital were not outside. Instead, they were in a large hall. There was wine and food as they chatted with each other. They did not care about the competition outside. In a while, when the final 10 people were selected, they would come here. A few white-bearded elders sat together, their faces beaming with joy. In this year's prince consort selection, there were many good seedlings. They are worth paying attention to. That Mu Zi is definitely a talented minister. Even I am ashamed of myself when it comes to politics. Forget it. You make it sound like other than politics, you can't compare to him in anything else. In the entire capital, there are not many who can compare to him in poetry. He even reminds me of the Jiang of Silla. The strange thing is, I have never heard of such a person before. To be compared to the Jiang of Silla, that is too much of an exaggeration. Actually, other than this mysterious Mu Zi, there are a few others who performed well. Inside the hall, the officials and nobles of the imperial court were enjoying the show, not minding the matter from getting out of hand. Beside the arena in Hibiscus Garden, the people who had already been assigned to their respective groups had worried expressions. A scholarly-looking young man suddenly waved his hand with a face full of resentment. The written examination is just a written examination. Why do we have to compete in martial arts? This is a disgrace to the cultured, simply a disgrace to the cultured. The person beside him nodded in agreement and said, "We are here to bring peace to the world. How can we act like boorish men?" A eunuch walked over and said, "Gentlemen, please enter the arena." Hearing this, the two of them silently walked up the stage. It was not easy to stand out from thousands of people. Even if it was a disgrace to them, they would not let go of this opportunity. The rules for the second round of combat examinations were simple. There were no rules. There were 10 arenas, and after the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, the person standing on each of the arenas would be the victor, and would be able to enter the inner sanctum and proceed to the final stage. There were many spectators around the arena. As a eunuch lit the incense and announced the start of the combat examination, the atmosphere on the arena changed immediately. Even the judges at the side of the arena could not believe what they were seeing. They had seen young talents writing beautiful essays in the examination hall, but they had never seen a frail scholar who fought with each other, scratched their faces, and used all sorts of methods to seduce them. Thinking about it carefully, it was not strange for such a scene to occur. It was rare to find someone who was well versed in both literature and martial arts. The first round of the written examination was extremely difficult. Those who remained in this round were mostly talented scholars. There were many who did not even have the strength to truss a chicken. It was fine for them to write essays, but it was better for them to compete in martial arts. Of course, the 10 arenas were not all so unsightly. There were 2 arenas where 2 young talents from the capital's aristocratic families were fighting. They had martial arts skills, and the rest of the people on the arenas were quickly cleared out by them. There was another arena where 9 people gathered together, which was a rare sight. They were chasing after a fatty and beating him up. No one knew what was going on. The strangest was probably the first arena. There were only 2 people on the first arena. The 2 of them stood on one side of the arena, motionless. Li Yi only realized that there was only one person left on the other side after clearing out the few people who were rushing towards him. The person wore a hood that covered his face, and it was difficult to see clearly from the outside. The person's body was also covered by a loose robe, and it was difficult to see anything. Other than Li Yi himself, this was another weirdo who did not want to show his true face to others. The other party did not move, and neither did Li Yi. He did not move because the person on the other side was very powerful, very powerful. Li Yi had just taught Li Han yesterday that there would always be someone better than him. He did not expect that in just one day, some things would come true for him. He thought that he had a lot of cheats in his life, and now he could not find a match for anyone below the Grandmaster level. Obviously, he was a frog at the bottom of a well. The person on the other side was obviously not a Grandmaster, but he did not have the confidence to defeat him. Li Yi did not move, and so the person on the other side moved. He was very fast, and there was even a residual shadow in front of Li Yi. Li Yi's figure swayed and disappeared on the spot. At the same time, the person's figure appeared where he was just a moment ago. Li Yi suddenly smelled a familiar fragrance. It was not the fragrance of perfume. It was the fragrance of Mingzu. Mingzu. He opened his eyes wide, and because he was so shocked, he even used his original voice. The figure was about to move, but after hearing his voice, it suddenly stopped. Li Yi could feel a pair of shocked eyes looking at him from under the hood. He quickly walked over, but the figure hidden under the hood suddenly took a few steps back, jumped directly off the arena, and soon disappeared from his sight. Li Yi stood alone in the arena, a little confused. What was going on? Mingzu disguised as a man, and fought with him over Shanning? Li Yi himself was shocked, not to mention the audience below. The person in the hood just now actually created a residual shadow. He must be an expert. They were excited, but the opponents suddenly gave up and left the arena. They were surprised and disappointed. Helplessly, they could only look at the last arena that had not been decided yet. On the arena, a young scholar with a swollen face pushed a companion off the arena with difficulty. He looked around, and found that other than him, there was only the fat man lying on the side of the arena. As long as he could drag the fat man off, he would be the winner. He walked to the fat man's side, grabbed his legs, and dragged him out with all his might. The fat man did not move an inch. His face turned red, and he used more strength. Rip! The fat man's trousers were torn, and he fell off the arena with a piece of cloth in his hand. At this point, the 10 winners of the wushu test had all been decided. In a hall somewhere in Hibiscus Garden. Li Xian looked around, and said doubtfully, "Strange, where did Mingzu go?" Just as he finished speaking, a figure walked in from outside. Li Xian walked forward, and said, "Where did you go?" "The last 10 people have been decided, we should go to the hall. I was delayed by something." Mingzu tidied up her clothes, and said, "Let's go. The Empress Dowager has arrived, the Imperial Concubine has arrived. His Majesty has arrived. The eldest princess has arrived. Princess Shanning has arrived." In the hall, hearing the eunuch's sharp and thin voice, many of the officials and nobles bowed to pay their respects. "Dispense with the formalities." The Empress Dowager looked below, and said, "Summon the 10 young talents into the hall." A trace of doubt appeared on Li Xian's face, and he muttered, "It's already this time, that guy still hasn't appeared." Mingzu looked out of the hall, and then retracted her gaze, and did not speak. Shanning sat on her seat, and her body was straight. She looked out of the hall without blinking, and her hands were tightly holding onto the hem of her dress. Under the lead of a eunuch, 9 people walked into the hall. The reason why there were 9 people was because there was a fat man who was carried in. Li Xian's gaze swept across the faces of those people, and his face showed disappointment. Shanning's gaze immediately fell on the figure on the far left, and she could not look away. Chapter 1155. To be able to pass the theory examination and the first half of the combat examination, you are all outstanding talents of the younger generation in the Jing Kingdom. According to the usual practice, before the final segment, an official from the Ministry of Rights had to give a formal speech. Li Yi had never seen this official before. He scanned the crowd and saw many familiar faces, but there were even more new faces. He had been away for 5 years, and many officials had been promoted or demoted. The surrounding officials and nobles glanced at him and then back, but there were 2 gazes that were always on him. Those were 2 gazes in the same direction. After being in a high position for so long, Mingzu had a sense of supreme authority. This kind of authority was not present on the sloppy Li Xian. All the immaturity could no longer be seen on Shanning's face. She wore a palace dress and sat beside Mingzu. She had on light makeup, and her eyes were looking in this direction. Li Xian tilted his head and looked at Shanning and Mingzu. He asked, "Why are you not anxious at all? Do you know something?" No one answered him. The official from the Ministry of Rights had reached the end of his speech, the first half of the combat examination has ended. For the second half, Princess Shawning will test you personally. What had just happened was only the first half of the combat examination. Only by passing the first half would one have the chance to be tested by Princess Shawning. The princess test was simple. The person who could defeat her would be the Emperor's son-in-law. If no one or more people won, the decision would be made by the Empress Dowager and the princess consort. Shawning walked down from above, holding a sword in one hand. A young man walked into the hall from the crowd. He held a long knife and bowed to her respectfully. "Your Highness, please excuse me." Whispers could be heard among the officials. He is a junior from the Jing family. No wonder he could pass 2 rounds and stand here. The Jing family has a genius in both literature and martial arts. I wonder if he can defeat Princess Shawning. If he can marry Princess Shawning, the Jing family's rise will be imminent. As the officials whispered among themselves, the official from the Ministry of Rites struck the gong, signaling the start of the competition. The young man had already unsheathed his sword the moment the gong rang. Last year, during the military examination, he had lost to Princess Shawning, who was disguised as a man, by 3 moves. In the past year, he had trained hard and his strength had improved greatly. He thought that he had a 50-50 chance of winning. Clang! He drew his sword very quickly, but Shawning was even faster. Halfway through pulling out his saber, a white shadow flashed in front of him. When he came back to his senses, a cold sword was already at his neck. Seeing this scene, a fatty who had just sat up from the ground took the opportunity to lie back down. Among the 9 of them, several of them couldn't help but shudder and take half a step back. I lost. The young man tilted his head and looked at the sword on his neck in disbelief. The officials were also stunned. From the looks of it, these people who had worked so hard to pass the written examination might not even be able to pass Princess Shawning's martial examination. This junior of the Jing family was already a rare genius in both literature and martial arts. People like him couldn't possibly reach the pinnacle of both. As for him, he was already one of the most outstanding individuals among the 10. Shou Ning withdrew his sword and simply threw it on the ground, saying, "Next." The official from the Ministry of Rites immediately said, "Next, Peng Er." No one responded. A eunuch walked over to take a look and said, "Peng Er has fainted." Fainted people naturally couldn't compete with the princess and were treated as forfeiting. The official from the Ministry of Rites crossed off Peng Er's name and said, "Next." "I forfeit." A young man said hurriedly. "I am not a match for the princess, I forfeit." Many of the people present shook their heads. It was fine if he was not a match, but if he didn't even have the courage to fight, it would be too cowardly. This time, it wasn't just for Princess Shawning's consort. The officials of the court also wanted to see if there was someone with both ability and virtue among these people so that they could guide them in the future. Clearly, this young man's forfeit had disappointed those who had their eyes on him. Up above, the Empress Dowager shook her head when she saw that only 2 people were left after Shawning eliminated them. This child should have passed the martial examination first and then the written examination. She and Emingzu have practiced martial arts for so many years. How could these young people be a match for her? Beside her, concubine Yen smiled and said, "That's not necessarily true." Watching those people being eliminated by Princess Shou Ning one after another, the official from the Ministry of Rites stood in the hall with a helpless expression and said, "Next, Mu Zi." Li Yi wasn't the last person. He didn't know how the list of competitors was arranged, but there was still one person behind him. Shawning thought about it and walked to the side of the official from the Ministry of Rites. She pointed to the last person and said, "I will compete with him first." The official from the Ministry of Rites was startled. "Your Highness, this. You can't do it, right? If you can't, then I won't compete." All right. The official didn't dare to say no. It wasn't difficult to change the order of the competition. If Her Highness didn't compete now, it would be a huge mistake for the Ministry of Rites. He would definitely be skinned by the minister afterwards. He looked at the name list again and said, "Next, Long Tao." The officials didn't know what Her Highness had said to the official from the Ministry of Rights. They felt it strange that the order of the competition was suddenly changed, but they didn't take it to heart. The last young man was a weak scholar. He looked at Shawning and said with a trembling voice, "Please, please show mercy, Your Highness. I won't hit you." Shawning thought about it and said, "Why don't you forfeit?" The young man's expression became solemn. He said, "A man should face difficulties head-on and not retreat. Even if I'm not a match for Your Highness, I will still try." The eyes of the surrounding people brightened slightly. "You have some courage. You know you can't win, but you still do it. Not bad. Even if you lose, you are so much stronger than the previous few." Shawning looked at him and nodded. She picked up the long sword that she had put down after the first round and said, "Then make your move. In order to respect you, I won't show mercy." The young man thought of the people who had been eliminated and then looked at the sword she picked up. His heart trembled. In the next moment, a look of determination appeared on his face, and he strode forward to meet them. So what if he failed? Retreating because of fear was more shameful than failure. Thump. He suddenly sprained his ankle and fell to the ground. He held his ankle, cold sweat dripping from his forehead. My ankle is sprained." Contestant number 9 was carried off for treatment because he had accidentally sprained his ankle. When he was carried off, he looked disappointed, as if he would not have retreated if he had not sprained his ankle. At this point, among the 10 people, only Mu Zi was left. Of course, this did not mean that he was the emperor's son-in-law. If he had not passed Princess Shawning's test like the previous people, he would have ended up the same as the previous people. The people who had been eliminated could not help but look at him. As long as he lost, they still had a chance. The official from the Ministry of Rights cleared his throat and said, "Next, Mu Zi." Li Yi took a few steps forward and stood in the middle of the hall. He looked at the woman opposite him. Shawning was also looking at him. Her expression was a little absent-minded as she stood there in a daze. She just looked at him. After a long time, the official walked to Shawning and cleared his throat. He whispered, "Princess, the competition has begun." Shawning looked away and nodded. He gripped his long sword and strode into the hall. She suddenly sprained her ankle. Her body swayed and the long sword in her hand fell to the ground. "Sprained my ankle." She steadied herself and limped to Li Yi's side. She raised her head, her eyes filled with tears. "I admit defeat." Chapter 1156. There was a moment of silence in the hall. Then, whispers could be heard. Some people even looked at the ground in front of them. They thought that the Ministry of Rights was too careless. How could they be responsible for the venue? If His Majesty, the Empress, or the Empress Dowager were injured, they would not be able to absolve themselves from the blame. Then, they were envious of the young man named Mu Zi. He was so lucky. Princess Shawning had defeated everyone except him. She had injured her ankle and lost without a fight. He had won so easily that it gave them a serious illusion. It did not look like he was going to marry the princess. Instead, it looked like Princess Shawning had overcome all the difficulties and obstacles to marry him. The jealousy of the people who were defeated by Princess Shawning could be felt even from a few feet away. Conspiracy, this was a blatant conspiracy. Why did they change the order of the competition when it was Mu Zi's turn? Princess Shawning's martial arts were so high, and this was a flat ground. How could she be so careless as to injure her ankle after taking 2 steps? Did they arrange everything before the competition? However, even though they knew there was something fishy going on, they did not dare to bring it up. The conspiracy was the royal family's conspiracy. Whoever dared to expose the royal family's conspiracy was obviously tired of living. Princess Shawning, who had sprained her ankle, was helped down by 2 palace maids. At this point, the selection of the emperor's son-in-law had been decided. The Empress Dowager and the Empress Dowager left first, followed by His Majesty and the eldest princess. When the officials finished sending them off and wanted to look for Mu Zi, they found that he had disappeared from the hall. Although the Empress Dowager, and His Majesty had left, the rest of the officials could still continue the banquet in the hall. Everyone gathered in twos and threes and whispered to each other. This boy is a rare talent. If we train him carefully, he will become a good husband in a few decades. It's a pity to be the emperor's son-in-law. That's not true. His Majesty has always been unconventional in choosing people. I don't think he will care about this. This is definitely not his style of doing things. Li Xian paced back and forth in the hall as he spoke with absolute certainty. He looked at the eunuch at the side and said, "What about Mu Zi? Let him come and see me." The eunuch respectfully replied, "Replying to your Majesty, the son-in-law has been summoned by Consort Taifei." Li Xian thought for a moment and said, "Then let him come after the old princess finishes asking questions. The one with the surname Mu must have some relationship with Li Yi. He could use the throne as a wager. If he really had nothing to do with Li Yi, he could give the throne to Li Han or Mingzu." In another palace in Hibiscus Garden, concubine Yen looked at Shaoning, who was being supported by two princesses, and looked back from time to time. She said, "All right, we're already here. There's no need to pretend." Shaoning immediately let go of the palace maid who was supporting her and ran over to ask, "Imperial Mother, how did you know?" Concubine Yen looked at her and said, "Although I am old, I can still see." "How is Imperial Mother old?" Shaoning hugged her arm and said, "Imperial Mother is not old at all." Concubine Yen shook her head and said, "Even you have grown up and know how to get married. How can I not be old?" Shaoning suddenly blushed. She looked down at her toes and didn't dare to speak. Concubine Yen stroked her long hair and said, "All right, you go back to your room first. I have something to say to the son-in-law." Speaking of the word son-in-law, Shawning's face became even redder. She secretly looked back and then left reluctantly. Li Yi followed concubine Yen into a palace. Concubine Yen waved her hand and left. She looked back at Li Yi and said, "There are no outsiders here. Sit anywhere, Your Highness Jiang of Silla." Li Yi was startled and then cupped his hands and said, "Consort Taifei's eyes are like torches." He gently took off the mask on his face and sat down in the guest seat. Concubine Yen looked at him and didn't speak. Li Yi knew that she was waiting for his explanation. Before the former emperor died, he gave a secret edict. Li Yi looked at concubine Yen and said, "Bing Ning's marriage should be decided by herself. No one can decide for her. This time, the search for the son-in-law is very popular. If the former emperor's edict was used, it would damage the royal family's reputation. So, we had to do this, I know." Concubine Yen looked at him and nodded. She said, "Not only Jiang of Silla has this secret edict, but I also have it." Li Yi looked at her doubtfully and asked, "If that's the case, why did Consort Taifei? If I didn't do this, would Jiang of Silla come back?" Concubine Yan's question was too direct and undisguised. Li Yi opened his mouth but didn't say anything in the end. The former emperor did have such an edict. Concubine Yen looked at him and said slowly, "But that's not the reason why I want you to come back and stand here." Concubine Yan's tone was very calm, but every word made Li Yi's heart tremble. "Bing Ning is my biological daughter. I only have one daughter. I watched her grow up day by day. I watched her learn to walk, learn to speak, and grow to the age of 18. Girls' hearts are always open to the outside world. It has been like this since ancient times. When they grow up, they can't be kept." She said these words and looked at Li Yi again. She said calmly, "She is already 18 years old. From the time she was 14 years old, she was no longer a child. I can treat her as a child, but you can't. You've already abandoned her once. Don't abandon her a second time, Your Highness Jiang of Silla. Do you understand what I mean?" Her expression was calm and her eyes were indifferent, but every word seemed to be sharp. Li Yi looked at her and nodded. He glanced at the table out of the corner of his eye. There was a book there. Mandarin Duck Handkerchief. This Mandarin Duck Handkerchief was thicker than any of the books collected by Mississippi Lu, by Su, and Xiao Huan. "Sir, what did mother say to you just now? In Hibiscus Garden, Li Yi and Shaning were walking side by side. She had changed her clothes so that she didn't look so grand. She also let down her hair and walked quietly beside him. In the past, when they walked together, she would walk around him or lower her head and kick her feet. This time, she just walked side by side with Li Yi. Just as concubine Yen said, no one could treat her as a child anymore. Li Yi didn't answer her question. He tilted his head and looked at her. He asked, that mandarin duck handkerchief was written by the old princess? Shaning nodded. Li Yi thought that he actually met the old princess today. It turned out that the woman whom Xiao Huan and the others regarded as their life mentor was Shaning's mother, the former concubine Yen, and now the old princess. Sir. Shaning suddenly stopped, turned around, and raised her head to look at him. Li Yi also stopped in his tracks and looked into her eyes. She took a deep breath and said, "This is the last time I call you sir." She slowly reached out her hand and smiled. "I am Li Bingning. Nice to meet you." Li Yi thought for a moment. He reached out and held her small hand. He said, "Li Yi, nice to meet you." She held his hand tightly and said, "Li Yi, you passed the test and defeated me. Now you are my son-in-law." A eunuch ran from behind and said, "Son-in-law, His Majesty asks for you." Li Yi turned around and looked at him. He said, "Go back and tell him that I don't have time." Chapter 1157. How dare you? The eunuch didn't expect the new emperor's son-in-law to be so daring to disobey His Majesty's orders and speak such arrogant words. His expression immediately darkened. However, when he raised his head and saw the face of the person beside the princess, his entire body trembled. He fell to his knees and said in a trembling voice, I have eyes but failed to recognize Mount Tai. I mistook His Highness Jiang of Silla as the Emperor's son-in-law. Please forgive me, Your Highness. Get up." Li Yi naturally wouldn't make things difficult for a eunuch. He waved his hand and said, "Go tell His Majesty that I'll visit him later." "Yes, Your Majesty." The eunuch immediately got up and ran in the direction he came from. So what if he was the Emperor's son-in-law? To His Majesty, Jiang of Silla was much more important. In the Hall of Diligent Government, Li Xian suddenly slammed the table and said with a frown, "What? Come find us later? How dare he? He isn't even the Emperor's son-in-law yet he dares." He suddenly paused and turned his head to ask, "Who did you say?" "Your Majesty, I didn't find the Emperor's son-in-law, but I saw Jiang of Silla." "Jiang of Silla said that he'll visit you later." "Jiang of Silla?" Li Xian was surprised and pleasantly surprised. When did Jiang of Silla return? Where is he now? The eunuch immediately replied, "He's with Princess Shaning in the direction of Hibiscus Garden." Li Xian had already stepped out of the door when a young girl ran over and asked, "Imperial Father, where's little aunt's son-in-law?" "Don't worry about little aunt's son-in-law for now." Li Xian squatted down and looked at her. "Xiao Rui, do you miss Dwainer?" "Imperial Father will take you to see Dwainer later, okay? Dwainer is back." The little girl's face was full of excitement. She pulled Li Xian's arm and said, "Why do we have to wait for a while? Let's go now." After she finished speaking, she seemed to have thought of something. She shook her head and said, "I can't go now." As she ran back, she turned around and said, "Father, wait for me. Wait for me to go back and change into some beautiful clothes." When she saw Dwainer, she was going to bring Dwainer to see that rascal who bullied her. Wasn't it just a competition to see who could jump higher? Dwainer would definitely be better than that rascal. Li Yi and Shaning parted at the gate of Furong Garden. He didn't need to look for Li Xian. He would definitely see him at the Li family today. He didn't return home. Instead, he left Hibiscus Garden and headed straight for the Imperial Palace. Because he was delayed by the combat examination today, he had yet to make his daily egg-fried rice. Imperial Palace. After watching the competition, Emingzu went straight back to the Hall of Morning Dew. The Ministry of Rights had submitted many reports regarding the selection of the Emperor's son-in-law. Recently, the Qi kingdom, the Wu kingdom, and even the Zhao kingdom had made many moves. The situation was constantly changing. Although she had delegated most of the political affairs to her subordinates, she still had to handle some matters personally. A palace maid walked in and said, "Your Highness, it's time to eat." After the new emperor of the Qi kingdom ascended to the throne, he spent a long time stabilizing the domestic situation. Now that the domestic situation had stabilized, there were other movements. Zhao Yi was a very talented person. If he became the emperor of the Qi kingdom, it would not be good for the Jing kingdom. She was thinking about the meaning of some of the actions of the Qi kingdom. Without raising her head, she said, "Put it aside for now." "What are you talking about?" "You can read the booklet later." "The food will get cold soon." The booklet in her hand was taken away and replaced with a bowl of fragrant egg-fried rice. Li Yi leaned on the table and looked down at her. He asked, "You've been eating it every day for the past few days. Aren't you tired of it?" Mingzu picked up the spoon and asked, "Aren't you tired of looking at Rui every day?" It was not a question of whether she was tired of it. It was a question of whether she dared to be tired of it. Li Yi looked at her and asked tentatively, "Did Rui come to find you?" Mingzu took small bites of the egg-fried rice and nodded. "She didn't do anything to you, did she?" Li Yi was a little nervous. Mingzu looked up at him and asked, "What could she do to me?" Li Yi did not know how to answer this question. Mingzu and Rui had been fighting for so many years. She had to compete with Rui on everything. Who was better at martial arts, who had bigger breasts, who was first and who was last? Ever since Rui broke through to the master stage, she had lost her whole life. But he could not say it out loud. Otherwise, he would be adding fuel to the fire and deliberately hurt her. In order to change the topic, he picked up the booklet that she had been reading. He looked at it and murmured, "Unusual movements at the border of Qi and Zhao. Zhao Yi wants to attack the Zhao kingdom first. They are all from the Zhao family. Why do they have to do this? The Qi kingdom wants to attack the Zhao kingdom." Mingzu looked up at him and asked, "Why?" Although the Zhao kingdom was not a vassal of the Qi kingdom, it had been following the lead of the Qi kingdom for more than 10 years. A few years ago, the two countries even joined forces to attack the Jing kingdom. Why would the Qi kingdom attack the Zhao kingdom? Li Yi said, "Because Zhao Yi wants to be the ruler of the world. He can't defeat the Jing kingdom or the Wu kingdom, so he can only pick the weak ones to bully." "How do you know?" "He told me." Li Yi thought for a while and suddenly looked at Mingzu. He asked, "The ruler of the world, do you want to try? If you want, I can talk to Zhao Yi and ask him to surrender. If he can't be the empress of the Jing kingdom, he can be the empress of this world." Zhao Yi wanted to be the ruler of the world, but it did not matter who the ruler was. If what he said was true, then even Li Yi could not catch up to his strange hobby. Mingzu looked at him and asked, "Don't you already have an empress?" "Why? Isn't one enough?" Li Yi was slightly stunned. "When did I have an empress?" She took out the booklet at the bottom and handed it to him. She said, "This booklet was sent here urgently this morning." Li Yi opened the booklet and looked at it. On the 10th day of the 10th month in the 8th year of Wuren, Princess Duan Rong led a volunteer army of 300,000 and attacked the imperial city of the Wu kingdom. At that time, thunder rumbled in the sky. Within a radius of 10 miles, people and animals panicked. It was said that Princess Duan Rong was blessed by the mandate of heaven and had the help of the god of heaven sent by the emperor. On the morning of the 11th day of the 10th month, the imperial city was breached. When Princess Duan Rong entered the city, the people of the imperial city greeted her on the streets. The Emperor Wu was captured by the imperial army in the palace. The moment the city was breached, he committed suicide in the palace with a dagger hidden in his sleeve. Although Li Yi paid attention to the news of the Wu kingdom at all times, in terms of speed of transmission, it was still not as fast as the imperial court. Yang Liuqing finally completed her path to empress. Li Yi had seen all the difficulties and obstacles along the way, and a smile appeared on his face. Seeing that Mingzu was looking at him, he hurriedly put away the smile on his face. He explained, "She is not my empress." You know, she is Rui's disciple, my martial niece. She only wanted to avenge her parents. The Empress thing was just something that happened along the way. Mingzu finished eating the egg fried rice and put down the spoon. She looked at him and asked, if she is not, then am I? You are not an empress yet, I am tired. Mingzu stood up and said, I don't want to be an empress, and I don't want to be an assistant princess. Li Yi asked in surprise, then what do you want to do? She looked at Li Yi and suddenly asked, do you still have the thing that I gave you? Li Yi reached into his chest and took out a brocade bag. Mingzu took the brocade bag that was still warm and opened it. Inside was a lock of hair. She looked at Li Yi and asked, do you still remember what you said to me before? I remember. Li Yi nodded and said, I said, if you are tired of this kind of life, you can come and find me. There is one more thing. Mingzu looked at him and slowly said. Mingzu, I have good news. She looked at Li Yi and her lips moved. Li Xian's voice came from outside. She returned the brocade bag to Li Yi. Li Xian strode in and saw Li Yi. He said in surprise, you are actually here. When they were about to reach the Li Xian mansion, the little girl next to Li Yi couldn't help it anymore. She asked in a low voice, Uncle Li, is Dwayner back? Li Yi nodded with a smile and said, he's back. He has been clamoring to see you all day. The little girl's face showed a happy expression. She ran a few steps and then stopped. She slowed down her pace and showed a reserved expression. As soon as they stepped into the courtyard, Li Duan ran out of the room and asked, Father, can I see Xiaorui now? Li Yi looked at the little girl next to him and said, what, you don't even recognize Xiaorui? The two children looked at each other at the same time. The feelings between children were always the purest, but they often didn't know how to express it. Li Duan had been clamoring to see Xiaorui all day, but when he actually saw her, he was so happy that he couldn't even speak. He was so happy that his face turned pale and cold sweat broke out on his forehead. Chapter 1158. Li Xian always appeared when he was least supposed to. For the sake of Xiaorui, Li Yi didn't argue with him for the time being. Xiaorui and Li Duan hadn't seen each other for more than 5 years. She was so excited that she couldn't speak. Li Yi and Li Xian walked into the room, giving them some time to be alone. So that Mu Zi is you. Li Xian looked him up and down and said, Mu Zi Li, no wonder Shaning lost to you on purpose. Why didn't I think of that at that time? Li Xian had enough IQ, but he was extremely lacking in EQ. A person who was always thinking of pushing the throne to someone else was definitely not normal. Li Xian had a look of disdain. I didn't expect you to be such a beast. You even had ideas about Shaning. Tell me honestly, did you have ideas about her the first time you saw her? If I remember correctly, she was only 11 years old at that time. The first time Li Yi saw Shaning was in the 2nd year of Jinghe. At that time, she was still at Sundra. At that time, he didn't even have ideas about Mingzu. At that time, he wasn't so beastly. Even now, the 18-year-old Shaning was just a big kid in his eyes. She was different from Mingzu and the others. Li Yi cracked his knuckles and said, do you believe that I won't even have ideas about you when I'm beastly? Li Xian knew that no matter how beastly Li Yi was, he wouldn't have ideas about him. But when he was beastly, he would hit him. He looked around and changed the topic. Miss Lu and the others haven't come back? Li Yi shook his head. No. Li Xian thought for a moment and asked, so you'll leave again? Li Yi thought for a moment and said, I'll leave after the new year. What about Shaning? Take her away. What about Mingzu? Take her away too. If you all leave, what about me? Li Xian had just sat down when he suddenly stood up and asked, if you take Mingzu away, what about the imperial court and the Jing kingdom? When Li Xian said this, he sounded very righteous and confident. When he was completely shameless, Li Yi actually had nothing to say in response. Li Yi sighed and said, you can still pass the throne to Li Han. Li Xian also let out a long sigh and said, Little Han has become smarter these past few years. It's not easy to trick him anymore. Mingzu will not leave. He looked at Li Yi and said, "You won't leave her here alone. Why don't you return to the capital? If anyone dares to object, I'll chop off his head." What did he mean by Mingzu wouldn't leave? If he hadn't appeared at the wrong time and interrupted Mingzu, who knew what would have happened, the capital is too small. Li Yi looked at him and said, "Only when you leave the capital, leave the Jing kingdom, will you know how big this world really is." Seeing the strange light flashing in Li Xian's eyes again, Li Yi knew that he shouldn't have said this. It was fine to abduct the princess, but abducting the emperor would cause him to be condemned and reviled by thousands of people. However, he would not stay in the capital for long. If he stayed here for too long, he wouldn't be able to find Rui. Li Xian looked at him, thought for a moment, and suddenly asked, "Your little martial nephew is about to sit on the throne of the Wu kingdom. Don't you want to have two empresses?" Li Xian's suggestion was very tempting, but his motive was not pure. Yang Liuqing became the empress for a better future of the Wu kingdom. Mingzu became the secret empress of the Jing kingdom because Li Xian couldn't help her. What did he mean by having two empresses? Did it have anything to do with him? In the room, both of them became silent. Everyone had a side that was not known to others. Some people looked beautiful on the surface, but secretly looked at Peppa Pig. Li Xian was actually very pitiful. On the surface, he was the emperor of the Jing kingdom, above thousands of people, and the most powerful man on this continent. However, what he was interested in was not the throne, nor was it power. From the beginning, there were only two stones of different sizes. Outside the room, in the yard, Li Duan covered his ears and said hurriedly, "Xiao Rui, I was wrong. I was wrong." The little girl put one hand on her waist and pulled his ear with the other hand. She said angrily, "What did you do wrong?" Li Duan said softly, "I was wrong that I didn't recognize you that day." The little girl originally thought that he was going to talk about how he used those words to anger her that day. Hearing him say that, her grip became even lighter. She said in a low voice, "Then I also didn't recognize you. It's my fault." Li Duan said hurriedly, "It's been too long. I've grown up. Of course you can't recognize me. You're not wrong, it's all my fault, but you still can't bully girls. I didn't know it was you at that time. I will never bully you." The little girl's hand changed from pinching to caressing. She asked softly, "Does it hurt?" Li Duan shook his head and said with a silly smile, "It doesn't hurt, it really didn't hurt." It was much lighter than when his aunt spanked his butt. The relationship between Li Duan and Xiao Rui was established when the two of them could not crawl. It had not been diluted by the passage of time. When Li Yi walked out of the room, the two of them were chatting and laughing as they played on the swing. Without disturbing them, he walked out of the estate and headed in the direction of the imperial palace. He had been interrupted by Li Xian earlier, so he and Mingzu had not finished talking. He was also very curious about what else he had said to her that time when he was drunk. Morning Dew Palace. Mingzu took off her phoenix coronet and changed into casual clothes. She said, "Come take a walk with me." Ever since Li Xian had moved into Hibiscus Garden, the already spacious imperial palace had become much emptier. There were no guards in the enormous imperial garden. It was already winter, but the capital always snowed late. In the imperial garden, fallen leaves covered the ground, making it bleak and desolate. After a moment of silence, Li Yi turned his head to look at her and asked, "What was that last sentence?" Mingzhu's footsteps paused. She pointed to an empty space in front of them and said, "Beat me, and I'll tell you." A few years ago, of course, Li Yi would not have agreed to this request of hers. But now it was different. Although Mingzhu had not stagnated in the past few years, he had made much faster progress. He could not beat Rui or a grandmaster, but Mingzhu, he was no longer the Jiang of Silla that she could bully at will. Li Yi smiled and nodded. Okay. Li Yi did not seem to practice diligently, but the tortoise breathing skill that he had learned from second great uncle was practiced 24 hours a day. The grandmasters around him were Rui, Chang, Su, and Elder Tian. From time to time, he would also communicate with second great uncle. In this life, he would never be able to make a comeback under Rui. But Mingzhu. When they first met, he was chased by her. Later, he was suppressed by her. Today, it was finally time for him to fight back. After Jiang of Silla and the princess entered the imperial garden, it became a forbidden area. Mingzhu walked to the empty space first. She took off her coat and put it aside. For the first time, Li Yi realized that he was not the person he was 5 years ago. Mingzhu was also not the Mingzhu of 5 years ago. She just hadn't met her fated chance. When she became a grandmaster, Rui and her would have to compete to know who would win. While he was distracted, a strong wind came from the front. Li Yi moved his body and raised his palm to meet it. 2 hours later. Li Yi's clothes were all soaked, but he won after all. He pressed Mingzhu on his lap and panted slightly. He asked, "Do you surrender?" Mingzhu's hair stuck to her face. She looked a little embarrassed. She said with a red face, "Let me go. You even wrote a letter to Rui to beat me." Li Yi looked at her and sneered. "When you asked her to spank me, did you ever think that you would have this day?" She struggled for a while, but Li Yi had sealed her acupoints. She couldn't exert any strength at all. Li Yi slapped a certain part of her body and said, "In the martial world, there are some debts that must be paid. Rui hit me 18 times that time. I remember every one of them. At that time, I thought that one day, I will pay you back 18 times, one by one. This was a once-in-a-blue-moon opportunity, and he might not come across it again in the future." Li Yi's slap landed, and his face revealed an expression of revenge. Mingzhu lay on his lap. After a moment of silence, she said, You said that if I got tired of this life, I would go to you and you would marry me." Li Yi couldn't slap her anymore. Really? He looked at her with some suspicion. He had guessed it right. She wanted to cheat him into marrying her when he was drunk and didn't remember what had happened. It's fake. She struggled to get up and looked at Li Yi. She asked, "If it's fake, will you still marry me?" Li Yi thought for a moment and said, "Yes." After saying the word, "yes," he was stunned for a moment. Maybe for 2 seconds. Then, he quickly got up from the ground and ran outside. Chapter 1159. The world is really unfair. Li Yi sensed the malice from this chance. He taught Tai Chi to Rui, and Rui became a guru. He kissed Mississippi Lu, and Rui also became a guru. He could understand these two ways of breaking through. Rui had accumulated a lot of experience, and she was enlightened because of Taiji. Rui had been thinking about him for a long time, and now that she had gotten what she wanted, it was not difficult for her to figure it out. But what happened to Mingzhu? I only spanked her 10 times. Why did she also become a guru? Did I accidentally open up her conception and governing vessels and let her become a guru in an instant? Maybe he could ask Lu Luo to put up more advertisements in the martial arts world. I have rich experience in assisting, and I am a professional in giving chances to help people become guru. Only available to women, and 20% off for group purchases. For more information, please go to Rui City. The address is. He had just taught Mingzhu the principle that he had to pay for what he had done. Now Mingzhu was teaching him the truth again. When Li Yi faced a grandmaster, it was not that he could not fight back. But Rui and Mingzhu had been stuck at a critical point for many years. All they needed was a kiss and a few pats, pats, pats. So once they made the breakthrough, they could already suppress ordinary gurus. Of course, it was like playing with him. Now she was lying on top of him. To be exact, she was riding on top of him. Run. Why don't you run? Mingzhu looked down at him from above, and said expressionlessly, "Just like 5 years ago, you can run." Li Yi sighed and grabbed her hand. With a little force, she lay on the grass with him. A long time ago, when the academy was just built, the two of them used to lie on the grass by the lake for 2 hours. Of course, at that time, they lay separately. No, Li Yi put his arm around her shoulder and said, I will take you with me. She lay on Li Yi's arm and suddenly asked, how far are you and Rui now? What do you mean? Did you hug her? Li Yi nodded. Did you kiss her? Li Yi nodded again. And then? Nothing. Li Yi shook his head. She turned her body, looked at him, and kissed him. Her lips parted on Li Yi's face and said, now we are the same. No. Li Yi shook his head and said, she kissed on the lips. She hesitated for a moment, and this time, Li Yi felt a soft touch on his lips. However, time passed even faster, and before he could feel it, it had already disappeared. You even stuck out your tongue. This time, Li Yi didn't wait for her to kiss him and took the initiative to kiss her. 2 hours. What were you two doing inside? Li Xian stood outside the imperial garden for 2 hours. His feet were numb. He knew that Li Yi and Emingzu had gone inside, so he did not go in to disturb them. However, he did not expect that they did not go in for a walk. They actually stayed inside for 2 hours. Emingzu, who always paid attention to her appearance, had messy hair. Li Yi was even more embarrassed. Even his clothes were torn, and there were a few strands of grass in his hair. These evidence were enough to prove that they had just had an intense and long exercise on the grass. This was a bit too long. Li Yi had seen Li Xian 3 times today. Fortunately, he finally had some vision for the last time and did not directly barge in like he did in the morning. He looked at Li Yi and Emingzu and said solemnly, I have something important to tell you too. When the usually frivolous Li Xian spoke to them with such an expression, it meant that he really had something important to tell them. Emingzu nodded and said, let's go back and talk. Morning Dew Hall. Li Xian looked at the two solemnly and asked, you two are leaving? Emingzu looked at him and then nodded. Li Xian let out a long sigh and said, I don't want to be the emperor. Li Xian had never wanted to be the emperor. So Li Yi and Emingzu both looked at him and waited for his explanation. You both know that I am not cut out to be the emperor. Li Xian looked at them and said, Emingzu has left. I can't handle the matters of the court. Li Yi nodded and said, we know. Li Xian sighed and said, I know that Emingzu has her own life and her own happiness. I don't have the power and I don't want to hold her back. But, I don't want to be the emperor. Actually, being the emperor isn't that difficult. Below the emperor, there are still the prime minister and all the civil and military officials in the court. You don't have to decide everything, big or small. Li Yi looked at him and said, you might as well hurry up and have a son with the empress and imperial concubine. When he grows up, you can pass the throne to him. Since ancient times, when the situation of a country stabilized, the emperor could be a mascot. As long as he didn't make any big mistakes, he only needed to supervise the officials and the country would continue to run smoothly. Speaking of this matter, the expression on Li Xian's face became even more sorrowful. He had already given birth to 3 children, 2 for the empress and 1 for imperial concubine. But, all 3 of them were daughters. Perhaps he really didn't have the same fate as Li Yi. I might not be able to make it. If Qin Er's pregnancy this time is a daughter. He suddenly looked up at Li Yi and Emingzu and said, why don't you try? They definitely wanted to try, but although his and Mingzhu's future child would have the surname Li, he wouldn't be able to inherit the throne of the Jing kingdom. Li Xian's plan as Rui would be in vain. Speaking of which, it was difficult to break through to Grandmaster, but it was even more difficult for a Grandmaster to get pregnant. Now that Rui and Emingzu had both become Grandmasters, if they wanted to have children in the future, they would have to go through the same hardships that he and Rui had gone through in the past. Li Yi didn't think it was impossible. A lifetime was long, and hard work paid off. As long as he changed a few positions and tried a few more times, he would succeed one day. He didn't know if his situation would be better if he became a Grandmaster. Apart from other things, at least his waist wouldn't be so weak anymore. Before Li Yi and Emingzu could answer, Li Xian shook his head and said, no, even if you can give birth, it will be more than 10 years later. I can't wait that long. Li Yi looked at him for a long time and said, there are so many princes in the Li family. You can just pass the throne to one of them. Li Xian looked at him and said, do you think I'm stupid? If I really pass the throne to someone else, do you think we can still live? It seemed that he wasn't as stupid as he thought. Li Yi looked at him and said, just accept your fate. Only you being the emperor is the best. Anyone who wants to be the emperor will not have a good ending. Li Xian seemed to understand something. He looked at him and asked, you mean, only those who don't want to be the emperor are the most suitable? Li Yi shook his head and said, I didn't say anything. There are countless princes who want to be the emperor. The only ones who don't want to be the emperor are probably you and Xiao Han. In the Mathematics Institute, Li Han, who had just solved a difficult mathematical problem, was different from usual. He didn't feel excited at all. Instead, he felt an inexplicable annoyance. A beautiful girl walked in and said with a smile, Brother Han, I cooked lotus seed porridge. Try it while it's hot. Li Han felt even more bitter when he saw the beautiful girl, but he still squeezed out a smile and said, thank you, Sister Wang. Chapter 1160. Sir, how do you solve this question? Li Han asked him with a question. Li Yi glanced at it and felt it was strange. Although this question required a lot of twists and turns, with his ability, he could solve even more difficult questions. It was strange that he couldn't solve this one. However, everyone had a blind spot in their thinking. This was normal. When Li Yi picked up the pen and was about to tell him, Li Han asked casually, Sir, is Duanwu not at home? She took Duaner and Xiao Rui outside to play. Li Yi didn't raise his head. Why, are you looking for her? Nothing. Li Han shook his head and suddenly said, Sir, I suddenly understand how to solve this question. I'll solve it myself first. I'll come back tomorrow to show you. Li Yi put down the pen and looked at him. Duanwu is not at home tomorrow either. Then after Li Han realized something was wrong as soon as he opened his mouth. He immediately said, I just have something to talk to her about. I still have some doubts about mathematics. I'll come back in a few days to ask Sir. Li Yi drank some water and asked, You're not wondering about mathematics, but why Duanwu ignores you? Li Han froze in place. After a moment, he sighed and said, A girl's mind is even harder than a mathematics question. Li Yi looked at him and asked, If you want Duanwu to pay attention to you, you have to first tell me who the younger sister of the Wang family is? Li Han sighed again and said, Her name is Wang Ling. The Wang family and the royal family had always had a close relationship. 7 or 8 years ago, they had bet on the right treasure and married their first daughter to Li Xian, who was still the heir. Now that the heir's wife had become the empress, the Wang family had become the most famous family in the capital. Wang Ling, was Wang Qin's younger sister. Her engagement to Li Han was even before Li Xian and Wang Qin. Li Yi didn't know if the Wang family was betting everywhere or if the Wang family's master's eyes were really extraordinary. He only found out after asking Li Han that it was the latter. The Wang family only had 2 daughters. One was married to Li Xian. One had been betrothed to Li Han since she was young. Wang Linger and Li Han were childhood friends. Speaking of which, the Dragon Boat Festival only appeared later. Unfortunately, there were some things that didn't care about first come, first served. There was no way to reason this out. Is there no way to make a girl not be jealous? Li Han looked at him and asked for help. Sir, what should I do? In his eyes, the teacher could teach him more than just arithmetic. He had so many mistresses. If he had 1/10 of his teacher's ability, he wouldn't have made things like this. It was a woman's nature to be jealous. A woman who wasn't jealous wasn't a woman. Even when Wanru and Rui would get jealous for no reason, not to mention the jealous Rui. If he knew how to stop a girl from getting jealous, he wouldn't have been beaten up so badly by her in the past. Li Han was just left out. Back then, he risked his life every single time, living under the threat of autumn water, living in fear. Li Yi looked at him and asked, Tell me the truth. Do you like that sister from the Wang family? Li Han pondered for a long time before saying, Ever since she was young, she always followed behind me in everything. I treated her like a younger sister. I would beat up anyone who bullied her. At that time, Lady Mother told me that she would be my consort. We promised when we were young that I would marry her when I grew up. Li Yi continued to ask, do you like her? I like the Dragon Boat Festival. Li Han looked up at him and said, but I can't hurt the sister from the Wang family. She trusts me the most. Sir, I really don't know what to do. Relationships were complicated. Li Yi could teach him arithmetic, but he couldn't teach him these things. Should he break the engagement with the Wang family and choose to be alone for the rest of his life? He could live a carefree life with the Dragon Boat Festival and leave the Wang family's childhood sweetheart alone until she grew old, or marry someone else and live a depressed life, or he could keep his promise and give up on the Dragon Boat Festival and complete the engagement with the Wang family, or there were other choices. These were all decisions that Li Han had to make himself. Even if Dragon Boat Festival was his sister, he wouldn't give Li Han any guidance on this matter. Li Han left. Before he left, he didn't get any answers from Li Yi. Li Yi picked up the teacup and found that there was no water left in the cup. A figure came out from the back of the hall and refilled his cup. Li Yi looked at Dragon Boat Festival and asked softly, do you blame me? He could tell Li Han that he didn't care about the engagement. A good man was the one who courageously pursued true love. He was Dragon Boat Festival's brother, so he naturally had to think for her first. If it was 7 or 10 years ago, before he came to this world, when he first came to this world, he would have told Li Han to pursue free love. This was what a young man should do, however, he wouldn't do that now. This wasn't the modern world after all. There were rules here. Maybe Dragon Boat Festival would be sad because of Li Han's choice. Maybe the other girl's hair would turn white overnight because of him. However, these were all his choices. The girl shook her head and said, actually, they met first. Brother, am I too jealous? I ignored Li Han because I wanted him to leave Wang linger. Am I very bad? There is no order in this matter, and there is no right or wrong. Li Yi stood up and patted her shoulder. He said, I believe that you will handle everything well. The mathematics college and the women's college were on vacation. When Li Yi and Shanning walked around the college, they could only see some servants. The teachers and students had already gone home. Xiao Han has locked himself in the mathematics college for the past few days. He said that he wouldn't come out until he proved the theorem. He didn't want to see anyone. Shanning looked at a building in the distance and said worriedly, I'm really worried that he will get sick from holding himself in. Li Han already knew that the theorem wasn't something he could prove in his lifetime. He was just avoiding it. He said that he wouldn't see anyone, but in fact, he just didn't dare to see two people. A beautiful girl came from the front and bowed to Shanning. She said, Greetings, Sister Ning Er. Shanning looked at her and asked, Ling Er, you went to see Xiao Han again? The beautiful girl nodded and said, Brother Han needs to use his brain every day. I cooked some lotus root and pork rib soup. It can nourish the blood, replenish the marrow, calm the nerves, and strengthen the brain. Go. Shanning nodded and said, he likes pork rib soup the most. She looked at Shanning and bowed to Li Yi before leaving. Then I'll go first. Shanning sighed and said, I just saw that Dragon Boat Festival had passed. I don't know what Xiao Han will do. Li Yi shook his head and said, let them worry about their own matters. Shanning looked at the pavilion in the middle of the lake in the distance and said, I haven't gone fishing in a long time. Let's go fishing by the lake, okay? Li Yi nodded. Shanning revealed a smile on her face. She subconsciously held onto Li Yi's hand and walked forward quickly. After 2 steps, she seemed to realize something and quickly let go of his arm. Her face once again revealed a reserved expression. Li Yi still liked to see her innocent and unaffected appearance. She didn't want to change herself for others and pretend to be reserved. Ning Er. Li Yi looked at her and said, you can do whatever you want in the future. Don't worry. No matter what you are, I like you. Her body trembled. She raised her head and looked at Li Yi. After a long time, the reserved expression on her face disappeared. She held onto his arm and happily said, then let's go fishing first. Then we'll go to the streets. I want to eat candy people. I want to eat 10, at the entrance of a small building in the academy. The beautiful girl looked at the girl in front of her. Her face was slightly flustered. She quickly said, I only cooked some soup. I didn't know that Sister Dragon Boat Festival had also cooked. I'll go back first. Dragon Boat Festival looked at the girl who hurriedly turned around and was about to leave. Her face revealed a complicated expression. Pa! A crisp sound of porcelain breaking came from behind. The beautiful girl turned her head and saw that the soup bowl in Dragon Boat Festival's hand had fallen to the ground and shattered into pieces. It's all my fault. Dragon Boat Festival walked over and looked at her. She said with some distress, the soup has been poured away. We can only let him drink Sister Ling's soup. Let's go up together. You're tuning into the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.